Good morning. Sorry. I have a bagel in my mouth. Oh, a piece of bagel in my mouth. I have a little bit more to chew on. Hang on. I woke up late. It's my fault. I shouldn't have woken up late. Guys, I spent like last night just reading stupid shit on gossip forums. Good shit, man, guys. Why is bagel so good? How are you guys doing this morning? Good morning. Good morning. We actually have two absolutely awesome listener in here. I feel very, very pressured to start right now, but I'm eating my bagel. No. Only one bagel a day. If you eat more than one bagel a day, you're gonna be sick of it very fast. Okay. I mute my phone because sometimes it bothers people. Right? It's getting there. Starlight just said that Sanshiro chapter 4 kind of feels like it's getting gossipy now with Mineko. I'm wondering where it goes because I don't know if it's a spoiler alert or not, but sorry. But I think most and almost all of NatsumeSōseki male main characters never really get the girl. They're all kind of a loser. Let's see what Sanshiro is gonna do with Mineko, huh? Alrighty, bagels in my stomach. Alright, coffee, tea all ready. Okay, guys. Sorry, taking my vitamins before I forget. Important to take the vitamins every day. Every day. No second bagel. Because I only need to take like another 10 minutes or 15 minutes to toast it and then slowly eat it. And I'm not even a slow eater, I'm quite a fast eater. But still, it takes me a while to gulp that one down just now. Alrighty, guys and girls and ladies and gentlemen, they and them, anyone in the channel and everything. Let's start, okay? Today we are continuing NatsumeSōseki's Sanshiro. Chapter 5. We are going to be reading chapter 5 until chapter 8. Yep, until chapter 8. We're going to stop at chapter 8. We're going to stop at chapter 9. That means I'm going to leave chapter 9 to Saturday morning. If I'm doing Saturday morning. Ha ha ha. We'll see. I'll read on Monday morning. We'll see. Okay, guys, let's start. Sanshiro by NatsumeSōseki, written and published in 1908 to 1909. Chapter 5. He walked in through the gate. The bush clover he had noticed on his last visit, grown taller than a man, now wore a mass of autumn foliage that cast a black shadow at its base. The shadow crept along the ground and disappeared into the house. It also seemed to climb up the hidden sides of the densely overlapping leaves, so strong was the sunlight striking their outer surfaces. Some nandinas stood beside the garden wash basin outside the lavatory. These, like the bush clover, were unusually tall. Their three fragile plumes stood close together, leaf stretching above the lavatory window. The veranda was partially visible between the bush clover and the nandinas. It ran away at an angle that took off from the nandinas. The shadow of the bush clover struck the house at the far end of the veranda, although the bush itself was the first thing inside the gate. Yoshiko sat in the shadow of the bush clover on the edge of the veranda. Sanshiro approached until he was almost touching the bush clover. Yoshiko stood up, her feet resting on the broad, flat stepping stone in the garden. Only now did Sanshiro realize with a shock how tall she was. "Come in." Again, she spoke as if she had been waiting for him, which reminded him of that day at the hospital. He walked past the bush clover as far as the veranda. "Please sit down." He sat on the edge of the veranda as ordered, his shoes resting on the garden stone. Yoshiko brought out a cushion up for him. "Here, sit on this." Again, he did as he was told. He had yet to speak since entering the gate. This simple girl merely said to him what was on her mind without, it seemed, expecting any answer from him. Sanshiro felt that he was in the presence of an innocent young queen. He need only obey her commands. Flattery was out of the question. A psychopathic word from him, and everything would be cheapened. Better to do her bidding like a mute slave. The childlike Yoshiko was treating him like a child, but he felt no injury to his self-respect. "Did you want to see my brother?" Sanshiro had not come to see Nonomiya. Neither had he not come to see him. Sanshiro did not really know why he had come. Is he still at the university? Yes, he always comes home late at night. Sanshiro was quite aware of this. He didn't know what to say. Then he noticed a box of paint and brushes on the veranda, also a half-finished watercolor. "Do you paint?" "Yes, just for fun." "Who is your teacher?" "I don't have one. I'm not that good." "May I look?" "At this? It's not finished yet." She handed the painting to Sanshiro. It was to be a picture of the garden, only the sky, the neighbor's persimmon tree, and the bush clover were done. The persimmons were too red. Pretty good, he said. This? Said Yoshiko with a start. There was nothing forced in her reaction, as there had been in Sanshiro's compliment. It was too late now for him to make light of what he had said, or to insist that he had meant it. Either way, Yoshiko would be too contemptuous of him. He went on looking at the picture, blushing inwardly. Turning towards the parlor, he found it empty and still. There was no sign of anyone in the sitting room or the kitchen. Has your mother gone home to the country? Not yet. She should be leaving soon, though. Oop. Good morning. Please take a seat. Thank you so much. Thank you. Today we are reading Sanshiro by NatsumeSōseki, Chapter 5. Not yet. She should be leaving soon, though. Is she here now? She's out shopping. Are you really going to move in with the Satomis? Why? No reason. Just that they were talking about it the other day at Professor Hirota's. We have not decided yet. Maybe I will, though. Sanshiro now had part of what he was looking for. Have the Satomis and the Nonomiyas always been so close? Yes, all friends. Did she mean that Satomi Mineko and Nonomiya Sohachi were just friends? There was something odd in that, but he could not pry any further. I heard that Professor Hirota used to be Sohachi's teacher. That's right. Yoshiko's answer brought the topic to an end. Would you prefer to live with Mineko? Me? I guess so. But I would hate to be any trouble for her brother. She has a brother? Yes. He graduated the same year as my brother. Is he a scientist too? No. He took his degree in law. Mineko had another brother who was a good friend of Professor Hirota's, but he died young. Now he only has Kyosuke. How about her mother and father? No, she answered with a little smile, as if to say it was comical to imagine Mineko with parents. They must have died quite some time ago. Yoshiko probably had no recollection of them all at all. So, that's how Mineko knows the professor? Yes, the brother who died was supposedly very close to the professor, and Mineko likes English. I'm sure she goes there a lot to study with him. Does she come here too? Yoshiko had started painting again at some point in the conversation. She didn't allow Sanshiro's presence to interfere with her work, but she could still answer his questions. Mineko? She asked, adding some shadow to the thatched roof beneath the persimmon tree. I made it a little too black, didn't I? She held the picture up for Sanshiro. This time, he answered honestly, yes, a little. Yoshiko wet the brush and started to wash out the black area. She does. Sanshiro had his answer at last. Often? Yes, often. She was still facing her picture. The conversation had become a good deal easier for Sanshiro once Yoshiko started the painting. Coffee? He watched in silence as she concentrated on washing out the black shadow beneath the thatched roof. But she used too much water, and her brushwork was inept. The black stuff streamed off in all directions, and the bright red persimmons turned the color of the stud, shade-dried kind. Yoshiko's brush hand came to rest. She held the paper out at arm's length and leaned her head back, looking at the picture from as far as possible. Finally, she murmured, "Oh well, it's ruined." It really was ruined beyond denial. Sanshiro felt sorry for her. You ought to forget about this one and start a new one. Facing the picture, Yoshiko looked at him out of the corner of the eyes. The eye was large and moist, Sanshiro felt increasingly sorry for her, and then she burst out laughing. How stupid! Wasting 2 whole hours like this. She painted several thick stripes lengthwise and breadthwise across the picture and slammed down the lid of the paint box. Enough, she said, standing. Come inside. I'll make you some tea. Sanshiro did not move. It was too much of a trouble to take off his shoes. Yoshiko's belated offer of tea left him greatly amused. Not that he was laughing at her for performing her feminine duties in her own good time, but the sudden "I'll make you some tea" struck him with a kind of irrepressible delight. This was not how one felt in approaching a member of the opposite sex. He heard voices in the sitting room. The maid was there after all. Eventually the door slid back and Yoshiko emerged carrying a tea set. Seeing her face from the front, he thought it the most feminine of faces. Yoshiko poured tea and set it between them on the veranda. She knelt opposite him on the matted floor of the parlor. Sanshiro had been thinking of leaving, but now that he was sitting near her, it no longer mattered. He had rushed out of the hospital that day, having stared at her and made her blush, but today he was all right. The tea was a good opportunity for them to start talking again across the width of the veranda. After they had exchanged a few remarks, Yoshiko asked him an odd question. Did he like her brother Sohachi? At first, it sounded like something a naive little girl might ask, but what he had in mind was a bit more profound. Academics, she said, look at everything as objects of study, and so their emotions dry up. But if you look at things with feelings, you never want to study them because everything comes down to love or hate. Unfortunately, as a scientist, her brother could not help viewing her as an object of study, which was very unkind of him because the more he studied his sister, the more his love for her would decrease. Great scholar though he was, however, Nonomiya still showed great love for his sister. Conclusion: he must be the best person in all of Japan. Sanshiro felt that her argument was perfectly reasonable, and at the same time, it was missing something. Just what it was missing, though, his muddled brain would not tell him, and he presented no open critique. He blushed to think that, in failing to offer a lucid critique of the remarks of a mere girl, he made such a feeble showing as a man. He realized, too, that one had to take these Tokyo schoolgirls seriously. Filled with a new respect for Yoshiko, Sanshiro returned to his rooming house. There, he found a postcard waiting for him. Please come to Professor Hirota's tomorrow. We leave for the Chrysanthemum Doll show at 1 o'clock. Mineko. Her writing looked familiar. He had seen it on the envelope in Nonomiya's pocket. He read the card over and over again. Oh, someone's in love. Sorry. Okay. The next day was Sunday. After lunch, Sanshiro went straight to Nishikatamachi, wearing a new uniform and well-shined shoes. He walked down the quiet lane to Professor Hirota's. From inside, he heard the voices of a man and a woman. The garden of Professor's house lay just within the front gate to the left. One could enter the garden gate and approach the veranda without walking through the house. Sanshiro had been just about to slip the boat, which was visible through a gap in the Photinia's hedge, where he became aware of the voices in the garden. They belonged to Nonomiya and Mineko. Then you just fall to earth and die. This was Nonomiya. I think it's worth dying for. Mineko replied. Of course, anyone that reckless would deserve to fall down and die. What a cruel thing to say! At this point, Sanshiro opened the gate. Standing in the center of the garden, the talkers looked his way. Nonomiya offered him an ordinary "Hello there" and a nod. He wore a new brown fedora. Ooh, fedora. Hey, this is the time when fedora is still cool, okay? Shh. When did the postcard come? Mineko asked Sanshiro, bringing the conversation with Nonomiya to an abrupt end. The master of the house was seated on the edge of the veranda, dressed in a suit and emitting his customary stream of philosophy. He had a foreign magazine in his hand. Yoshiko stood next to him, leaning back with her hands on the veranda and staring at the thick straw sandals on her outstretched feet. Obviously, everyone had been waiting for him. Hirota threw his magazine aside. Let's get going then. Congratulations, you have finally dragged me out of the house. What an awful chore this must be for you, said Nonomiya, going out with him. The two women looked at each other and shed a private laugh. They walked out of the garden in a single file. How tall are you? Mineko said from behind. A beanpole, Yoshiko replied simply. When they came side by side at the front gate, she explained, That's why I wear sandals whenever I can. Sanshiro was starting out of the garden after them when a shoji on the second story clattered open and Yojiro emerged from the handrail. You going? He asked. Yes. Are you? No. What's the point? A lot of stupid fixed up flowers? Oh, come on. What's the point of staying at home? I'm writing an essay. A major essay. I don't have time for stuff like that. With a startled laugh, Sanshiro hurried after the others. They were 2/3 of the way down the lane towards the street when he caught sight of them in silhouette beneath the sky's expanse. Sanshiro felt that his present life was becoming a thing of far deeper significance than his life in Kumamoto had been. Worlds number 2 and 3 were both represented in this group image. One half was dark and gloomy. The other is bright as a field of flowers. The two were in perfect harmony in Sanshiro's mind, and Sanshiro himself was being woven into the fabric almost before he knew it. But there was something unsettled about the design that made him feel anxious. As he walked along, Morning, Gary. Please have a seat. But there was something unsettled about the design that made him feel anxious. As he walked along, it occurred to him that the immediate cause of this anxiety was the topic of Nonomiya's conversation with Mineko in the garden. He wanted to ferret it out as a way of dispelling his anxiety. The two of them had reached the corner. They stopped and looked back towards him. Mineko held her hand to her brow. Sanshiro caught up with them in less than a minute, but no one said a thing. They merely started walking again. After a while, Mineko spoke to Nonomiya. You would say something like that. You're a scientist. It seemed to be a continuation of their talk in the garden. That has nothing to do with it. If you want to fly, you have to think up a device that is capable of flying. It's as simple as that. You have to use your mind first, don't you see? Maybe that would be enough for someone who didn't want to fly very high. It would have to be enough for him. Otherwise he would just get killed. Thank you for the chair, Hikari. Always supporting me. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So the best thing is to play it safe and stay on the ground. What a bore. Instead of answering, Nonomiya turned to Hirota. Lots of women are poets, he said, smiling. And the trouble with men, Hirota said, is that they can never quite become pure poets. Nonomiya said nothing in response to this odd remark. Mineko and Yoshiko started their own conversation. Sanshiro could finally ask his question. What were you two just talking about? Ah, nothing, Nonomiya said. Flying machines. Sanshiro felt as if he were hearing a punchline of a comic story. No one said much after that. Lengthy conversations were impossible now in any case amid the weekend crowds. A beggar was kneeling on the ground outside of the Oganon temple. Forehead pressed to the earth, he poured forth a stream of loud entreaties. He would raise his face at intervals to reveal a white smudge of sand on his forehead. No one looked at him. Sanshiro and his four companions also passed him by, unconcerned. When they had left him several yards behind, Professor Hirota turned around and spoke to Sanshiro. Did you give the beggar anything? No, Sanshiro replied. Looking back, the beggar's hands pressed together beneath the white forehead was persisting with his loud cries. He doesn't really inspire you to give him anything, does he? Yoshiko put in. What do you mean? Her brother looked at her, but his tone of voice was not reproachful. His expression was, if anything, cool and detached. Mineko offered her critique. The way he kept on ranting, it doesn't have any effect. That's not it, said Hirota. He's in the wrong place. There are too many people going by. If they come across him on the deserted mountaintop, everyone would feel like giving him something. Yes, but he could wait all day without a soul coming by, Nonomiya said with a chuckle. Listening to the other's critique of the beggar, Sanshiro felt that some damage was being done to the moral concepts he had cultivated thus far. Not only that, it never crossed his mind to toss the beggar money, however. He had actually found it unpleasant to walk past that man. He had to admit that the others were being truer to themselves than he was. They were people of the city who lived beneath heavens that were broad enough to enable them to be true to themselves. Coffee? The farther they walked, the more people they encountered. Soon, they came across a lost child, a little girl of perhaps 7. She swept aimlessly back and forth beneath the sleeve of the throngs. Grandma! Grandma! She called out in tears. Everyone who saw her seemed touched. A few stopped to look. The poor thing, someone said. But no one took her in hand. The little girl attracted the attention and sympathy of everyone around her, but still, she had to keep crying aloud in search of her grandmother. It was a strange phenomenon. She's in the wrong place too, I suppose, Nonomiya said, keeping his eyes on the shifting shadows of the little girl. Everyone figures a policeman is bound to take care of her sooner or later, so they avoid the responsibility, Professor Hirota explained. If she comes near me, I'll take her to the police box. So why don't you go get her and just take her over? Her brother suggested. I don't want to go chasing after her. Why not? I don't know. There are so many people here. I don't have to be the one. That's it, Hirota said, avoiding the responsibility. She's in the wrong place after all, Nonomiya said. The two men laughed. At the top of Dangozaka, they found a swarm of people by the police box. The lost child was finally in the hands of the police. You can relax now, Mineko turned and said to Yoshiko. Oh, I'm so glad. Viewed from the top, the slope of Dangozaka curved to the right. The narrow street looked to the pointed end of a sword. The two-story building on the right obscured the lower half of the high exhibition sheds on the left. Higher up, beyond the sheds, flew a number of tall banners. People seemed to be plunging down into the valley below. Those who were plunging down and those who were crawling up came together in a chaotic jumble that clogged the street and gave what must have been the lowest part of the valley a grotesque sort of movement. a fitful squirming that quickly tired the eye. Standing atop the slope, Professor Hirota exclaimed that this is horrible. He was obviously ready to go home. All but pushing him from behind, they walked down the hill towards the bottom where the slope began to curve and leveled out. There were large, reed-thatched exhibition sheds lining either side and towering over the narrow street. They were enough to make the sky itself look cramped. Everything was so tightly packed together the street was darkened. Amidst all this, the ticket takers at the shed down were shouting at the top of their lungs. So utterly remote from normal voices were their cries. They promptly a critique from Professor Hirota. Those are no human sounds. They are the voices of the chrysanthemum dolls. They entered a shed on the left. The first tableau was a scene from a kabuki play showing the attack of Soga brothers. All the dolls, from the lowly Goro and Juro to the great Yorimoto himself. Sorry. I dropped my pen. The great Yorimoto himself wore equally gorgeous costumes fashioned from chrysanthemums. The faces, hands, and feet, however, were carved of wood. The next was a snow scene with a young woman in agony. She too was a wooden doll covered with clothing made entirely of chrysanthemums. Yoshiko gave her full attention to the dolls. Hirota and Nonomiya became involved in another discussion. They were saying that these chrysanthemums were cultivated differently or some such thing, when a few other spectators came between them and Sanshiro when he moved several feet ahead. Mineko had already gone ahead of Sanshiro. Most of the crowd was composed of local shopkeepers and their families. There seemed to be a few educated people here. Standing in this crowd, Mineko turned around and craned in Nonomiya's direction. Nonomiya was pointing across the bamboo railing towards the roots of the chrysanthemum, heatedly explaining something. Mineko turned away and pushed along by the other spectators, headed for the far exit. Sanshiro forced his way through the crowd in pursuit of her, leaving the others behind. Confession time? What do you think? No, Sanshiro is too much of a coward. Mineko! He called when he had at last caught up with her. She reached for the green bamboo railing and turned her head the slightest bit to look at him. She said nothing. Beyond the railing was a scene depicting Yoro waterfall. A round-faced young man with an axe in his belt was crouching at the basin of the waterfall, holding a gourd scoop. Sanshiro was nearly oblivious to what lay beyond the railing when he looked at Mineko. Is something wrong? The words slipped out. Still, she said nothing. She let her black eyes settle languorously on Sanshiro's forehead. He found in the soft crease of her eyelids some unfathomable meaning, and in that meaning a fatigue of the spirit, a slackness of the flesh, an appeal close to suffering. Sanshiro forgot that he was waiting for an answer from her and relinquished everything to her eyelids and eyes. I want to leave this place, Mineko said. The eyes and eyelids seemed to be drawing closer together. The nearer they came to each other, the more strongly the feeling took root in his heart that he must leave this place for her sake. Almost at the moment, this feeling reached its height. She turned away with a swing of his head, withdrawing her hand from the railing. She stepped forward. She stepped towards the exit, Sanshiro following close behind. When he caught up with her outside, Mineko hung her head and placed her right hand against her forehead. The crowd swirled around them. Sanshiro leaned close to her. Is something wrong? He whispered. She began to walk through the crowd in the direction of Yanaka. Sanshiro, of course, went with her. They had gone half a block when she came to a halt in the middle of the crowd. Where are we now? On the way to Tennoji in Yanaka, exactly the opposite direction from home. Oh, I don't feel well. Standing in the street, Sanshiro felt painfully helpless. He tried to think of something. Isn't there some quiet place that we could go? Mineko asked. In the in the lowest part of the valley, where Yanaka and Sendagi met, there was a little stream, the Ogawa. If they follow it through the neighborhood to the left, they would soon come out to an open field. The stream flowed straight north. Sanshiro thought about the many walks he had taken, often on the far side, just as often on the near side. Mineko was standing now beside a stone bridge that crossed the Ogawa. This was where it flowed out to Nezu after cutting across Yanaka. Can you walk another block or so? Yes, I can. They crossed the bridge and turned left, walking several yards to the end of the kind of alleyway that led to someone's house. Just before they reached the gate, a wooden bridge took them back across the stream. They continued upstream along the bank to a broad field where there were no more passerbys. Out in the tranquil autumn, Sanshiro became suddenly talkative. How do you feel? What is it? A headache? It must have been the crowd. There were some pretty low-class men in the doll shed. Did one of them do something? Mineko did not speak. After some moments, she raised her eyes from the moving water and looked at Sanshiro. The flash of her eyelids were taut again. This reassured him somewhat. Thank you. I feel much better now. Shall we rest a while? Yes, let's. Can you walk a little farther? I think so. Good. There's a much nicer place over there where we can sit down. All right. 100 yards upstream they came to another bridge. It was an old plank, perhaps a foot wide, that had been thrown across the stream. Sanshiro rode over and Mineko came after him. He turned and waited for her. She walked as easily here as anywhere, it seemed to him. She moved ahead in even strides, with none of that affectedly feminine tiptoeing. There would be no point in offering her his hand. They saw a thatched roof farther on. The entire wall below the roof was red. Moving closer, they found the color was that of red peppers hung up to dry. Mineko stopped walking when they were close enough to make this out. How lovely, she said, sitting down on the narrow hands of grass that bordered the stream. What little grass that had lost its summer's greenness. Mineko showed no concern that she might soil her bright kimono. Can you walk a little farther? Sanshiro urged, still standing. Don't worry, this is fine. You're not feeling better? I'm just tired. Sanshiro relented and sat on the dirty patch of grass several feet away from Mineko. The stream ran just by below them. It was shallow now that the water level had fallen in the coming autumn, shallow enough for a wagtail to fly over and perch on its jutting rock. Sanshiro gazed long into the clear water. It gradually began to turn muddy. A farmer upstream he saw was washing radishes. Mineko was looking into the distance. A broad field lay on the other side of the stream. Beyond the field, some woods, and above the woods stretched the sky. The color of the sky was changing little by little. Streaks of color began to trail across its monotonous clarity. The deep, transparent blue background grew slowly more diffuse, and a heavy white pall of cloud came to overlay it. The overlay began to melt and stream away, so languidly that it was impossible to distinguish where the background ended and cloud began. And over all of this drifted a soft hint of yellow. The sky was so clear before, said Mineko. Now the color is all muddied. Sanshiro took his eyes from the stream and looked up. This was not the first time he had seen a sky like this, but it was the first time he had heard the sky being described as muddied. And she was right, he saw. There was no other way to describe this color. Before he could say anything in reply, however, Mineko spoke again. It's so heavy. It looks like marble, she said, using the English word. She was looking up high, eyes narrowed. Then she moved her narrow eyes slowly until they were turned upon Sanshiro. It does look like marble, don't you think? Sanshiro had no choice but to agree. Yes, it looks like marble. Mineko fell silent. After some moments, it was Sanshiro who spoke. Under a sky like this, the heart becomes heavy, but the senses become light. What do you mean by that? Mineko asked. Sanshiro had not meant much of anything by it. Instead of answering her question, he said, "It's a comforting, dreamy sort of sky. It seems as if about to move, but then it never does." Mineko began watching another far-off cloud. Every now and then, they would hear the cries of the chrysanthemum doll ticket takers welcoming customers. What loud voices they have! It's amazing they can shout like that all day long, Sanshiro said. He suddenly recalled the 3 companions they had left behind. He started to say something, but Mineko replied to him first. It's their business, just like the beggar at the Ogadon temple. They're in the wrong place then. Sanshiro brought forth an accustomed flash of wit and enjoyed a good laugh at his own joke. Hirota's comment on the beggar had struck him as very funny. The professor is always saying something like that, you know? Mineko said softly, almost as if she was talking to herself. Then she added with a sudden life, "We could be very successful beggars sitting here like this." Now it was her turn to laugh at her own humor. Nonomiya was right though. We could wait here forever without anyone coming by. All the better, don't you think? She shot back, but continued. We are the beggars who don't beg after all. It sounded as if she added this to elucidate the first remark. Just then, a stranger appeared. He had emerged from the shadows of the house where the red peppers were drying and at some point had crossed to the other side of the stream. Now, he moved steadily in their direction. He wore a suit and a mustache, and he seemed to be about Professor Hirota's age. When he came opposite, he jerked his head around and glared directly at them with a look of unmistakable loathing. Sanshiro found it difficult to go on sitting there. The man eventually passed them by, walking off with his back to them. Sanshiro watched the man's receding shadow and said, as if it had just occurred to him, I'm sure Professor Hirota and Nonomiya have been looking for us. Don't worry, Mineko responded coolly. We are big boys and girls. It won't matter that we are lost. But we are lost, and I'm sure they will try to find us, he insisted. Mineko's coolness only increased. All the better for someone who likes to avoid responsibility. Who do you mean? Professor Hirota? Mineko did not answer. Nonomiya? Still, she did not answer. Are you feeling better now? We ought to go back, he said, starting up. Mineko looked at him. He sat on the grass again. It was then that Sanshiro knew, somewhere deep inside, this woman was too much for him. He felt, too, a vague sense of humiliation accompanying the awareness that he had been seen through. Still looking at him, Mineko said, Lost child. He did not respond. Do you know how to translate that into English? Answered. The question was too unexpected. Sanshiro could answer neither that he knew nor that he did not know. Shall I tell you? Please. Stray sheep. Do you understand? Sanshiro never knew what to say at times like this. He could only regret. When the moment had passed and his mind began to function clearly that he had failed to say one thing or another, nor was he superficial enough to anticipate such regret and spit out some makeshift response with forced assurance. And so he kept silent, feeling all the while that to do so was the height of stupidity. He thought he understood the meaning of stray sheep, but then, perhaps, he did not. More than the words themselves, however, it was the meaning of the woman who had used them that eluded him. He looked at her helplessly and said nothing. She, in turn, became serious. "Do I seem forward to you?" Her tone suggested a desire to vindicate herself. He had not been prepared for this. Until now, she had been hidden in the mist that he had hoped would clear. Her words cleared in the mist, and she emerged distinctly a woman. If only it had never happened. Sanshiro wanted to change her attitude towards him back to what it had been before, a thing full of meaning, neither clear nor clouded, like the sky stretched out above them. But this was not to be accomplished, he knew, with a few words of flattery. "Well then, let's go back," she said without warning. There was no trace of bitterness in her voice. Her tone was subdued, as if she had resigned herself to being someone of no interest to Sanshiro. The sky changed again, and the wind blew from the distance. The sun darkened, and the broad field looked wholly desolate. Sanshiro suddenly felt how the damp earth had chilled his flesh. He could hardly believe that he had continued sitting in such a place. Had he been alone, he would have gone somewhere else long ago. Mineko too, but perhaps Mineko was a woman who would sit alone in a place like this. Thank you so much for stopping by. Thank you. It's turned cold. We ought to stand up at least. A chill could make you sick. Are you alright now? Yes, I'm alright. Her reply was unambiguous. She stood up quickly, murmuring, almost intoning to herself as she did so. "Stray sheep." Sanshiro, of course, said nothing in reply. Pointing in the direction from which the man in the suit had come, Mineko said that she would like to go past the red peppers if there was a road there. They walked towards the house with the thatched roof and found a path behind it. They had covered half of its length, and when he asked, "Will Yoshiko be coming to live with you?" Mineko gave him a crooked little smile and replied his question with one of her own. "Why do you ask?" Before he could answer, they came to a mud puddle, a brimming 4-foot stretch of the path, in the middle of which someone had set a stepping stone. Sanshiro hopped across without the aid of the stone and then turned to watch Mineko. She set her right foot on the stone, but it was unsteady. She rocked back and forth, preparing to spring across. Sanshiro held out his hand. "Here, hold on." "No, I'm all right." She was smiling. As long as Sanshiro held his hand out, Mineko stayed where she was. When he withdrew it, she shifted all her weight to her right leg and swung her left leg across. Determined not to muddy her feet, however, she jumped too hard and lost her balance. She fell forward against Sanshiro, her hands grasping his arms. "Stray sheep," she murmured. Sanshiro could feel her breath against him. Bruh. Morning, Closhy. Little close. Morning. Sorry. That was the end of chapter 5, guys. Isn't that great? Okay. Sip of coffee, then we are gonna start chapter 6. Chapter 6. The bell rang and the instructor left the room. Sanshiro shook the ink from his pen and was closing his notebook when Yojiro... Thank you! Take another sip again, man. Sanshiro shook the ink from his pen and was closing his notebook when Yojiro turned to him. Hey, let me see that, will you? I missed a few things. Yojiro drew the notebook over and peered into it. The page was covered with the words, "Stray Sheep." What's this? I got tired of taking notes and started scribbling. Pay more attention next time, will you? He was saying something about Kant's transcendental idealism versus Berkeley's transcendental realism. Wasn't he? Something like that. You weren't listening? You weren't listening? No. You really are a stray sheep. Oh well. Yojiro stood up with his notebook and started away from his desk. Come with me, he said to Sanshiro, who followed him out of the classroom. They went downstairs out to the front lawn. A large cherry tree stood there. The two sat down beneath it. This place became a field of clover in the early summer. When Yojiro had first arrived with his application for admission to the university, he had seen two students lying under the tree. One said to another, "If they'll let me sing in the oral exam, I would have plenty of answers for them." The second one began to sing softly. "Oh, give me, Professor. Who knows what's life's about? So when I take the test on love, I'll pass without a doubt." Ever since that day, Yojiro had been fond of this spot under the cherry tree. And whenever he had something to tell Sanshiro, he would bring him here. When Sanshiro heard the story, he understood why Yojiro had translated "Pity's akin to love" like a popular song. Today, however, Yojiro was unusually serious. He sat cross-legged on the grass and pulled out a magazine entitled Literary Review, which he handed to Sanshiro, opened and rotated in his direction. "What do you think of this?" he asked. The open page carried the heading "The Great Darkness" in large letters. The author had signed himself a propagule. Sanshiro recognized the Great Darkness as the phrase Yojiro always used for Professor Hirota, but he had never heard of this propagule. If there was such a person. He looked at Yojiro before venturing a reply. Yojiro said nothing, but instead thrust his flat face towards Sanshiro, pressing his right index finger against the tip of his nose. He held this pose for a long time. A student across the way started grinning at them. Yojiro noticed him and took his finger from his nose. "It's me," he said. "I'm the one who wrote it." Now Sanshiro understood. "Is this what you were writing when we went to see the chrysanthemum dolls? Don't be stupid. That was just a few days ago. You can't print stuff this fast. The one I wrote that day will come out next month. This one I wrote a long time ago. You can guess what it's about from the title. Professor Hirota? Of course! First, I'll arouse public opinion, then take care of the groundwork for the professor to get into the university." "Is this such an influential magazine?" Sanshiro had never heard of it before. "No, that's the trouble," Yojiro replied. Sanshiro could not help smiling. "What's the circulation?" Yojiro avoided a direct answer. "Anyhow, it's better than not writing at all," he insisted. That's true. No matter how bad the circulation of the thing is, it's better than not writing and publishing it. Writing and publishing it, it's better than not doing anything. You get what I mean? I'm trying to say that better do something than not do something. It's as simple as that. Yojiro explained that he had a long-standing connection with the magazine, that he wrote something for nearly every issue when he could find the time, but he had changed his pseudonym with each article, and as a result, aside from 2 or 3 of the student editors, no one knew who he was. Yojiro's lack of renown came as no surprise. This was practically the first time Sanshiro himself had heard of Yojiro's literary associations. He failed to see the point, however, of Yojiro's using a playful pseudonym as A. Propagule and publishing his major essays in secret. When Sanshiro was imprudent enough as to inquire if he were writing to make some spare cash, Yojiro's eyes nearly popped. Only somebody who has just emerged from the wilds of Kyushu and doesn't know anything about the major literary trends would ask a question like that. No one with a brain in his head can stand here and in the center of the intellectual world and be indifferent to the violent upheavals going on before his eyes. We, young men, are the ones who hold today's literary power in our hands, so we have to take the initiative to make every word, every phrase count. The literary world is undergoing a spectacular revolution. Everything is moving in a new direction, and we must not be left behind. We have to make new trends to go the way we want to, or it's not worth being alive. The way they throw the word literature around, you would think was garbage, but that was just the literature you hear about in places like in the university. What we meant by literature, the new literature, is a great mirror of life itself. The new literature will have to influence the movement of the whole of Japan's society, and in fact, it is doing just that. While they are all asleep and dreaming, it's awe-inspiring. Sanshiro listened in silence. He thought Yojiro was laying it on a bit thick, but he was certainly intense enough, and he spoke with the utmost solemnity. Sanshiro was moved. If that's a spirit in your work, I suppose you don't even think about getting paid for it. Now, there you are wrong. I try to get as much as I can. Of course, the magazine doesn't sell, so they haven't paid me. They haven't paid me yet. We really have to figure out a way to sell more. Do you have any ideas? Now he was asking for Sanshiro's advice. The level of his course had suddenly descended to practical matters. Sanshiro found this very odd, but it doesn't seem to bother Yojiro. The school bell started clanging. Anyhow, take this copy and read my essay. Great title, don't you think? It's bound to shock people. If you don't shock them, they won't read. Damn them. Oh my god, this is so rude. It's basically talking about clickbait, guys. He's talking about clickbait in 1909. They went inside the classroom and took their seats. Soon the professor came. They started taking notes, but the great darkness had aroused Sanshiro's curiosity. He placed the open literary review beside his notebook and began to read the essay as unobtrusively as possible during pauses in his note-taking. Fortunately, the professor was nearsighted and totally absorbed in his own lecture. Sanshiro's delinquency was of no concern to him. Very sure of himself now, Sanshiro proceeded to alternate between taking notes and reading the essay until, in his one-man pursuit of a feat that was meant for two, he succeeded in thoroughly losing track of both the great darkness and the lecture. The only clear impression he retained was a passage of Yojiro's. Quote, "How many aeons did nature expend in fashioning a precious jewel? And how many aeons did the jewel lie gleaming in earth until fate brought it forth?" The rest simply passed him by. He did, however, manage to get through the hour without once writing the word stray sheep. As soon as the lecture ended, Yojiro turned to Sanshiro. "How do you like it?" When Sanshiro answered that he had not actually read the essay yet, Yojiro berated him for not knowing how to use his time. "Be sure to read it." Sanshiro promised to do so at home. By then, it was lunchtime. They walked out through the gate together. "You'll be going out tonight, won't you?" Yojiro asked, halting at the corner of the side street leading home in Nishikatamachi. Sanshiro had forgotten. The class dinner was tonight. Yes, he said at last. He would be going. "Stop by for me, won't you?" "There's something I want to talk to you about." Yojiro had a pen holder tucked behind his ear. Perhaps a little too self-consciously, Sanshiro agreed to stop by. He took a bath and went up to his room with feeling refreshed. There was a postcard on his desk. The sender had drawn a picture on one side of the card. It showed a little stream of shaggy grass on its bank and two sheep lying at the edge of the grass. Across the stream stood a large man with a walking stick. He had a ferocious-looking face molded closely on the devil in Western paintings. Lest there be any doubt, he had been labeled devil in a phonetic rendering of the English word. The card, only return address written in tiny script, was Lost Child. Sanshiro knew who that was, and it thrilled him that she had put two stray sheep in the picture, suggesting that he was the other one. Mineko had included him from the beginning, it seemed. Now, at last, he understood what she meant by stray sheep. He thought about reading the Great Darkness as he had promised Yojiro, but he was not in the mood for it. He kept looking at the postcard. The drawing had a comic quality that was not to be found even in Aesop. It looked innocent, but at the same time witty and unconventional, and there was something behind it all that moved Sanshiro's heart. In terms of technique as well, it was a thoroughly admirable job. Each detail had been rendered clearly. Yoshiko persimmon tree was not to be compared with it, or so it appeared to Sanshiro. Eventually, he started in on the Great Darkness. He could not concentrate at first. The essay began to draw him in after 2 or 3 pages, and before he knew it, he was moving 5 pages, 6 pages ahead, until he had effortlessly taken care of the essay's full 27-page length. Only when he read the final sentence did he realize that he had come to an end. He took his eyes from the magazine and thought to himself, now I've read it. But in the next instant, when he asked himself what it was that he had read, there was nothing. How many times you guys read something and then you just finish it and then you realize that you don't realize what you just read? That happens to me a lot. Sorry for interjection. He took his eyes from the magazine and thought to himself, I've read it. He asked himself what it was he had read. There was nothing. There was so much nothing, it was funny. He felt only that he had enjoyed a big, exciting read. Sanshiro was struck with admiration for Yojiro's literary skill. The essay began with an attack on the contemporary man of letters and ended with an extravagant praise for Professor Hirota. It was particularly severe on the foreigners teaching foreign literature at the university. The university should immediately appoint a suitable Japanese to teach courses worthy of its greatness, or else the institution that was supposed to be the pinnacle of academy would be no better than an Edo Temple Grammar School. A great brick, that mummy. To be sure, the situation could not be helped if there was no suitable man, but here was Professor Hirota, a man who had taught in the college for 10 long years, content with the low pay and obscurity, but a true scholar nonetheless. Here was a man who deserved a professional post in the university, who would contribute to the new trends in the scholarly world relate to the vital forces of the society. Boiled down, it was all the essay had to say, but this little bit had been stretched out to 27 pages of extraordinarily reasonable sounding prose and brilliant aphorisms. Among the many entertaining passages were pronouncements like, "Only old men pride themselves on baldness." Venus was born from the waves, but men of visions are not born from the university. If the university has only PhDs to boast of, then the beach at the Tagonorura has only jellyfish. But the essays has nothing else to offer. In one especially strange passage, after likening Professor Hirota to the Great Darkness, Yojiro compared other scholars to paper lanterns that can do no more than glow feebly on a 2-foot space around them, precisely as the professor had said of him. He also noted that he had that day that objects such as paper lanterns and slim pipes were relics of bygone age, of no use whatsoever to us young men. Sanshiro thought about Yojiro's essay and concluded that it had much vitality. He wrote it as if he were all by himself a representative of the new Japan, and this mood swept the reader along. But the thing was totally without substance, like a battle without a base of operations. Worse, it could be interpreted as a piece of political chicanery. Sorry, I need to find out how to pronounce this word, or else I won't be able to proceed. Chicanery? Chicanery. 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 Political chicanery. Chicanery. Okay. Sorry. Worse, it could be interpreted as a piece of political chicanery. But Sanshiro, a country boy, could not formulate his suspicions so precisely. He merely felt, once he had read the essay and considered, sorry, considered his reaction, that something about it dissatisfied him. He picked up Mineko's postcard again and looked at the two sheep and the devil. He found everything about it pleasing, which only served to increase his dissatisfaction with Yojiro's piece. He stopped thinking about the essay after that and turned his attention to writing a reply to Mineko. Unfortunately, he did not know how to draw. He would compose something literary. It would have to be something worthy of the postcard, but such excellent phrases did not come easily to mind. He dawdled away the time until 4. Changing into a formal wear, Sanshiro left for Nishikatamachi to pick up Yojiro. He went in through the back door to find Professor Hirota eating dinner at a small table on the matted floor of the sitting room. Yojiro knelt respectfully nearby, serving him and asking, "How do you like them, Professor?" The professor's cheek was bulging with what appeared to be a hard object. On the table was a dish holding 10 black burnt things, each about the size of a pocket watch. Sanshiro knelt on the mat and bowed. The professor went on struggling with the thing in his mouth. Yojiro plucked one of the objects from the plate with chopsticks and handed it out to Sanshiro. "Here, have a taste." Balancing it on his palm, Sanshiro saw that it was a dried clam broiled in soy sauce. "Big, aren't they?" he said. "You bet they are," Yojiro agreed. "And these are no ordinary clams either, they are idiot clams." "What in the world?" "You know, when they die, their shells open and this long red neck comes out, like an idiot with his tongue hanging out. Why are you eating such weird things?" "What do you mean by weird? They're good. Try one. I made a special trip to get them for the professor. He has never had any before." "A special trip? Where did you have to go for them?" "Downtown, Nihonbashi." Sanshiro found this all very comical, rather different from the tone of essay he had just been reading. Again, Yojiro asked, "How do you like them, Professor?" "They're tough." "Maybe so, but they're good. You gotta chew them well to get the flavor. If you chew them that long, your teeth would wear out. Why did you buy such old-fashioned things?" "Shouldn't I have? Maybe they're no good for you, Professor." "They are better suited to Satomi Mineko." "Why is that?" Sanshiro asked. "She's so calm and patient. She'll just go on chewing until the flavor comes out." "She's calm, all right," said the professor, "but wild too." "It's true, she's wild. There's something of the Ibsen woman about her. With Ibsen woman, it's all out in the open. Mineko is wild deep inside. Of course, I don't mean wild in the ordinary sense. Take Nonomiya's sister. She has this kind of wild look at first glance, but in the end, she's very feminine. It's an odd business. So with Mineko, the wildness is directed inward then?" Sanshiro listened to the other's evaluation of Mineko without saying anything. He could not agree with either. To begin with, he found the use of wild to describe Mineko incomprehensible. Eventually, Yojiro left the room and returned wearing the same kind of formal outfit that Sanshiro had on, the dark coat, the split skirt. "We'll be going now," he said to the professor, who merely sipped his tea in silence. They went out. By now it was quite dark. They were only a few steps beyond the front gate when Sanshiro spoke up. "The professor called Mineko wild, didn't he?" "Yes, he's like that. Given the time and place, he'll say anything that comes into his head. It's really a joke when he starts in on women. What he knows about them probably adds up to zero. How the hell can you understand women if you've never been in love?" Yojiro spat out the English word, love. "Yes, but you agree with him." "Right, I said that she's wild. Why? What's wild about her?" "It's not any one thing. All modern women are wild, not just Mineko." "You said that she's an Ibsen character, didn't you?" "I did." "Which character did you have in mind?" "Well, she's just like an Ibsen character, that's all." Sanshiro was not convinced, but he decided not to pursue the matter. They had walked a short way in silence when Yojiro said, "Mineko is not the only one like an Ibsen character. All women are like that nowadays, and not just women. Any man who had had the whiff of the new atmosphere has something of Ibsen about him. People just don't act freely the way Ibsen characters do. Inside, though, something is usually bothering them." "Nothing's bothering me." "You're kidding yourself. There's not a society anywhere without its flaws, right?" "I guess not." "Well then, every creature living in society is going to feel dissatisfied about something. Ibsen's characters have the clearest of their perception of the flaws in the modern social system. We'll all be like that before long." "Do you believe that?" "I'm not the only one. All men of intelligence can see it." "Does the professor think so too?" "The professor? I don't know about him." "But it stands to reason. He said Mineko is calm and at the same time wild, didn't he? If you interpret that, it means that she can stay calm because she's able to go along in the harmony of her surroundings. But since she's dissatisfied with something, she's wild underneath it all, don't you see?" "I do now." "What a mind he has! When it comes to things like this, the professor is great after all." Sanshiro had been hoping to advance the discussion a little more in the direction of Mineko's character, but his gush of praise for the professor Yojiro had changed the subject. "The thing I want to talk to you about." "Oh, before I get to that, did you read The Great Darkness?" "What I have to say won't make much sense unless you have read it. I read it at home after I left you." "How did you like it?" "What did the professor have to say?" "The professor? He doesn't know a thing about it." "Well, I did enjoy that, but I don't know. It's like drinking beer when you want to eat. It doesn't fill you up." "That's fine, so long as it's exciting. That's all it matters. That's why I use a pseudonym. I'm still in the preparatory stage after all. I'll keep this way for now and come out with my real name when the time is right. Anyhow, enough of that. Here's what I want to tell you. At tonight's gathering, Yojiro was going to bemoan the inactivity of the Department of Literature, and Sanshiro would have to join him. Since the inactivity was a known fact, others were certain to support them, and together they would devise a plan to correct the situation. Yojiro would suggest that a Japanese professor be brought into the department without delay. Everyone would agree with him, of course, because it was so obvious. Then the question would arise who would be a suitable candidate, and Yojiro would bring up Professor Hirota's name. Sanshiro then would have to back him up with his wholehearted praise of the professor. Otherwise, someone who knew that Yojiro lived with the professor might raise doubts. Yojiro didn't care what anyone might think about him personally, but he did not want to cause the professor any embarrassment. Everything would go well, of course, since there were several others in on the scheme. But the more supporters they had, the better. For that reason, it was important for Sanshiro to speak. In the event they reached a consensus, they would choose a representative to see the dean and the president of the university. Things might not go that far tonight, but that was alright too. They would play it by ear. Yojiro spoke with a singular eloquence. Regrettably, however, it was a slippery eloquence, and it lacked weight. At times, it sounded as if he was delivering a deadly serious lecture on joke. Essentially, though, his cause was a good one, and Sanshiro expressed his general approval. Only Yojiro's somewhat devious methods bothered him, he said. This brought Yojiro to a halt in the middle of the street. They were standing now in front of the Morikawa shrine gate. Sorry. To you, it looks like I'm being devious, but all I'm doing is using human ingenuity beforehand to keep the natural order of things from going astray. That's entirely different from hatching fool schemes that goes against the nature. So what if I'm being devious? Devious methods aren't bad, only bad methods are bad. Sanshiro could say nothing to this. He thought he had objections to raise, but he could not verbalize them. The only things in Yojiro's speech that had made a clear impression on him were the ones that had never occurred to him before. Those were the parts that won his admiration. That's one way to look at it, he said vaguely, and the two walked again side by side. The field of view broadened suddenly when they entered the university gate. The building stood out here and there as large black shapes. Where the roof lines gave out, the luminous sky began. The stars were out in enormous numbers. Look how beautiful the sky is, Sanshiro said. They took a few more paces looking up. Hey, Sanshiro. What? Sanshiro thought this would be a continuation of the conversation. How do you feel when you look at a sky like this? It was an unusual question coming from Yojiro. Sanshiro had any number of stock answers he could give him, eternity, infinity, but he was sure that they would only invite Yojiro's laughter, so he kept them to himself. We are so damn useless. Maybe I'll give up on this campaign tomorrow. Writing the Great Darkness won't do any good. What's this all of a sudden? Looking at the sky does it. Sanshiro, have you ever fallen for a woman? Sanshiro could not answer him immediately. Women are terrifying, said Yojiro. I know, said Sanshiro. Yojiro burst out laughing. The nighttime quiet made it sound awfully loud. What do you know about women? Sanshiro hung his head. It's going to be a nice day tomorrow. Just what they need for the track meet. You ought to go. There'll be lots of good-looking women in there. The two walked through the darkness to the students' assembly hall. Electric lights were burning brightly inside. Yeah, women are terrifying. I agree with that. They walked along the wooden porch and turned into the dining room. Several others had arrived before them and gathered into groups. There were 3 separate groups of different sizes. A few individuals who chose not to join them were silently reading the house newspapers and magazines. There were conversations going on everywhere, more conversations than group it seemed, but the room was relatively calm and quiet. The greater release of energy was in the billows of tobacco smoke. More and more students arrived. Their black shadows would materialize out of darkness on the porch, then light up one by one and enter the room. At times, 5 or 6 shadows in a row would light up like this. Soon everyone was there. Yojiro was running back and forth through the smoke. Wherever he went, he discussed something in hushed tones. Sanshiro watched him and thought, the campaign is starting. A little later, the student organizer called for everyone to find a seat. The tables had been set beforehand. The students flocked to the tables in no order whatever, and the dinner started. In Kumamoto, Sanshiro only drank red sake, a cheap local brew. That was all That was all Kumamoto students ever drank, and no one questioned the custom. If they went out to eat, it would be at the local beef house. Some suspected that the beef in that particular restaurant might be horse meat. The students would lift the meat from the plate and slap it against the wall. If it fell, it's supposed to be beef. If it got stuck, it was a horse meat, like magic. For Sanshiro, this gentlemanly gathering of students was a unique occasion. He manipulated his knife and fork with great pleasure. And when those were at rest, he consumed large quantity of beers. The food here is terrible, isn't it? The student next to Sanshiro said to him. He was a soft-spoken young man, and extremely close-cropped hair and gold-rimmed glasses. I suppose so, Sanshiro replied. With Yojiro, he would have answered honestly that the food tasted excellent to a country boy like himself. But in this case, he feared that an honest answer might be taken for sarcasm. The student then asked Sanshiro, "Where did you go to college?" "Kumamoto." "Oh, really? My cousin went there. He says it's a terrible place." "Yes, barbaric." Loud voices suddenly echoed from the far side of the room. Sanshiro looked over to see Yojiro holding forth to his immediate neighbors. Every now and then he would say something like "Dite fabula." Sanshiro had no idea what this meant, but each time Yojiro said it, his listeners would burst out laughing. He grew increasingly ebullient. "Dite fabula, we young men of the new age." The student, sitting diagonally opposite Sanshiro, a light-complexioned, genteel-looking fellow, rested his knife for a moment to look at Yojiro's group. Then he smiled and said, chuckling at his own French. Oh my god, I can't read French, guys. Il allait diable au corps? Okay, I'm gonna skip that. I can't read French. I'm not a Frenchie. Yojiro and his cohorts seemed not to have heard this. At that moment, all four raised their beer glasses in exultant toast. I can barely read English. Don't force me to read French. That's just another fucking insanity. "He's certainly a lively one," the young man with the gold-rimmed glasses said to Sanshiro. "Yes, he does a lot of talking. He once treated me to a plate of rice and curry at the Yodo Miken. I've never seen him before. He just walked up and dragged me over there." He laughed. Sanshiro realized that he was not the only one that Yojiro had treated to rice and curry at the Yodo Miken. Soon coffee was served. Well, coffee was served after beer? What the fuck? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Soon coffee was served. One of the students stood up. Yojiro started clapping wildly and the others joined in. The one who stood up wore a new black student uniform and had already grown himself a moustache. He was extremely tall. A man made for standing up in front of others. He began to deliver a speech. "That we have gathered together here tonight to partake of an evening merriment in the name of friendship is in itself a cause for pleasure. It occurs to me, however, that the significance of this gathering is not merely social, that it may well produce something having far greater influence, so I rise to address you now. The dinner began with beer and is ending with coffee. It is a thoroughly ordinary dinner. But the nearly 40 men who drink this beer and coffee are by no means ordinary. And what is more, in the interval between our starting the beer and finishing the coffee, we have achieved an awareness of the expansion of our destiny. The call for political freedom took place long time ago. The call for freedom of speech is also a thing of the past. Freedom is not a word to be used exclusively for phenomena such as these, which are so easily given outward manifestation. I believe that we young men of the new age have encountered the moment in time when we must call for that a great freedom and freedom of the mind. We young men can no longer endure the oppression of the old Japan. Simultaneously, we live in the circumstances that compel us to announce to the world that we, young men, can no longer endure the new oppression from the West. In society, and in literature as well, the new oppression from the West is just as painful to us, the young men of the new age, as is to the oppression of the old Japan. All of us here are engaged in the study of Western literature. A study of literature, however, is always ever a study. It is fundamentally different from bowing at the feet of that literature. We do not study Western literature in order to surrender ourselves to it, but to emancipate minds that have already surrendered to it. We possess the confidence and the determination never to study any literature, however coercively it may be pressed upon us, that does not coincide with this purpose. It is our possession of this confidence and this determination that we differ from ordinary man. Literature is neither technique or business. It is a motive force of society, a force that is more in touch with the fundamental principles of life. This is why we study literature. This is why we possess the aforementioned confidence and determination. This is why we anticipate from tonight's gathering an effect of more than common importance. Society is in violent motion. This is equally true of literature, which is a product of society. In order to avail ourselves of this motive energy and to guide literature in conformity with our ideals, we insignificant individuals must band together and fulfill, develop, and expand our destiny. In that, this evening, beer and coffee have carried this hidden purpose of a step ahead. It is precious beer and coffee 100 times more precious than ordinary beer and coffee. When the speech ended, the assembled students all cheered enthusiastically. Sanshiro was among the most enthusiastic. Then Yojiro sprang to his feet. "The fabula! Who gives a damn how many words Shakespeare's used or how many white hairs Ibsen had? We don't have to worry about surrendering ourselves to stupid lectures like that. But in the university that suffers. We have got to bring in a man who can satisfy the youth of the new age. Foreigners can't do that. First of all, they have no authority in the university." Again, the room was filled with cheers. Then everyone was laughing. The man next to Yojiro shouted a toast to the dative fabula. The student who had spoken earlier immediately seconded the idea. But there was no beer left. Yojiro ran out to the kitchen. The waiters brought sake. When all had drunk, someone shouted, "Another toast! This time to the great darkness!" Those around Yojiro burst into raucous laughter. Yojiro scratched his head. When the dinner ended, the young men all dispersed into the darkness. Sanshiro asked Yojiro, "What is Dete Fabula?" "It's Greek," he said without elaborating. And Sanshiro let it go at that. The two men walked home beneath the beautiful sky. Sip of coffee. The next day, as expected, the weather was fine. It had been an unusually mild year, and today was especially warm. Sanshiro went to the public bath in the morning. It was nearly empty, since the men of leisure were then in short supply. In the changing room, he noticed a large poster for the Mitsukoshi fabric store. It featured a drawing of a pretty woman who looked something like Mineko. On closer inspection, he saw that the eyes are different. He could not tell how straight the teeth were. Of Mineko's features, it had been her eyes and her teeth that had most startled Sanshiro. Yojiro was of the opinion. Oh, thank you. I'll see you later. Of Mineko's features, it had been her eyes and teeth that had most startled Sanshiro. Yojiro was of the opinion that she was slightly buck-toothed, which explained why her teeth was always showing, but Sanshiro did not believe it. His mind thus occupied as he soaked in the bath, Sanshiro finally emerged without really washing himself. The awareness that he was a youth of the new age had been strengthened suddenly the night before, but nothing else had been strengthened. Physically, he was still the same. On weekends, he relaxed far more completely than anyone else. Today, he would go to the track meet after lunch. Sanshiro had never been fond of sports. He had gone rabbit hunting a few times at home, and once he was the flagman for a college boat race. That time he was the target of a great outcry when he mixed up the red and green flags. Of course, the professor in charge of the pistol for the final race had failed to fire it. Or rather, he fired it, but it did not go off, and this confused Sanshiro. He stayed away from athletic contests after that. Today, however, was the first track meet to be held since his arrival in Tokyo, and he meant to see it. See ya. He meant to see it. Yojiro too had urged him to go. According to Yojiro, it was the women rather than the meet itself that were worth seeing. One of those women would be Nonomiya's sister, and with Nonomiya's sister would be Mineko. He wanted to go over and say hello or something. Sanshiro went out for lunch. The entrance to the meet was at the south end of the playing field. There, the rising sun and English flag was displayed crosswise. He understood what the rising sun was doing in there, but why the English flag? Maybe it was for the Anglo-Japanese alliance, but he could not see any connection between the Anglo-Japanese alliance and the university track meet. The playing field was a grass rectangle. Much of its color had faded with deepening of autumn. The spectators' area was on the west side, bounded at the rear of the artificial hill, in front of the playing field fence, and arranged in such a way that everyone was herded into it. Too small for a crowd that had come, the place was packed. At least he did not feel cold, though, thanks to the good weather. He did see a fair number of overcoats, but there were also women holding parasols. Sanshiro was disappointed to find that the ladies' seats were separated from the rest and unapproachable for ordinary human beings. Also, there were a lot of important-looking men in the frock coats, which made him appear less impressive than he might have wished. Ogawa Sanshiro, youth of the new age, had shrunk a little in stature. He did not fail to survey the ladies' section, however, through the spaces between the men. His view from the side was not a good one, but the sight was lovely. All the women were decked out for the occasion, and viewed from a distance, all had beautiful faces. But this meant that no one stood out as more beautiful than anyone else. The whole had its beauty as a whole, a beauty by which women subdue men, not by which one woman outdoes another. This too came as a disappointment to Sanshiro. But if he looked closely, he thought, Mineko and Yoshiko should be there. He discovered them eventually in the front row next to the fence. Now that he knew where to look, Sanshiro was enjoying the satisfaction of having accomplished this much when 5 or 6 men flew before his eyes. It was the end of the 200-meter race. The finish line was directly in front of Mineko and Yoshiko, just under their noses, in fact, and in watching them, Sanshiro could not avoid having these young gladiators enter his field of vision. Soon, the 5 or 6 increased to 12 or 13, all of them out of breath. Sanshiro compared the attitude of these students with his own, and the difference shocked him. Whatever possessed them to go galloping along like that? But the ladies were watching with great enthusiasm, and Mineko and Yoshiko more so than any. Sanshiro suddenly wanted to start galloping. The man who had just won the race was standing in purple shorts, facing the women's section. Sanshiro took a good look at him and thought he resembled a student who had spoken at the gathering last night. Anyone as tall as that would naturally come in first. The timer wrote 25.74 seconds on the blackboard. When he was done, he threw the chalk down and turned towards the stand. It was Nonomiya. He wore a black frock coat with an official badge on his chest. Sanshiro had never seen him so handsomely dressed. Nonomiya took out a handkerchief and slapped it 2 or 3 times against his sleeve, then left the blackboard and cut across the lawn to wherever Mineko and Yoshiko were sitting. Leaning over the low fence, he stretched his back into the ladies' section and started talking. Mineko stood up and walked over to him. They seemed to be talking back and forth across the fence. Mineko suddenly turned around, smiling delightedly from his distant vantage point. Sanshiro kept close watch on the two of them. Next, Yoshiko stood and approached the fence. Now the two became 3. On the lawn, the shot put competition was starting. Probably nothing required as much strength as putting the shot. Neither was there anything else in proportion of the strength it required was such a bore. All it involved was literally putting a shot. It had nothing to do with skills. Standing by the fence, Nonomiya glanced at the proceedings and smiled. Then it seemed to have occurred to him that he could be obstructing the view. He left the fence and retreated to the lawn. The 2 women returned to their seats. The shots were being put every now and then. Sanshiro had almost no idea how far things were supposed to go. He felt stupid, but he went on standing there nevertheless. Finally, the event seemed to have been concluded. Nonomiya wrote 11.33 meters on the blackboard. There was another running event, then the broad jump, and then the next hammer throw. With the beginning of the hammer throw, Sanshiro's patience gave out. People should go ahead and hold all the athletic meets they like. They simply shouldn't expect other people to watch them. Convinced that the female spectator's ardor was terribly misplaced, Sanshiro slipped away from the playing field and came out to the artificial hill behind the seats. A cloth partition stood in his way. Retracting his steps, he turned right away and walked a short distance along a gravel-top area where he encountered a few others who had escaped from the meet. Some were finely dressed ladies. He turned right again and climbed a path to the top of a steep rise. Where the path gave out, there was a large boulder. He sat down on it and looked at the pond beneath the rock wall. The crowd let out a roar in the playing field below. Sanshiro spent a blank 5 minutes staring atop the boulder. Soon he felt the urge to move again and stood pivoting on the balls of his feet. Through the pale red maple leaves at the skirts of the hill, he caught glimpses of Mineko and Yoshiko walking by. Sanshiro stood at the top, looking down at the 2 of them. They emerged from the network of branches to an open, sunny patch. If he said nothing, they would pass him by. Perhaps he ought to shout, but they were too far away. He took several swift paces down the grass hillside, and one of them happened to glance in his direction. This brought him to a halt. He did not like the idea of ingratiating himself with them. He was still somewhat annoyed about the track meet. "Oh, look who's there!" Yoshiko exclaimed, smiling. The young woman could be depended upon, it seemed, to greet the most commonplace sight with eyes full of wonder. It was not hard to imagine, though, that she would encounter the extraordinary with a look of fulfilled expectations, and so there was not the slightest discomfort in meeting her. The mood was always relaxed. Standing there, it occurred to him that this was due entirely to those big, always moist black eyes of hers. Mineko also came to a halt. She looked at Sanshiro, but today, for once, her eyes were not trying to tell him anything. She might as well have been looking up at a tall tree. In his heart, Sanshiro felt he had seen a lamp go out. He went on standing where he was. Mineko too remained still. "Why aren't you at the track meet?" Yoshiko asked from below. "I was there until a minute ago, but I got bored and came here." Yoshiko turned to look at Mineko, but Mineko's expression did not change. "How come you two left? I saw how fascinated you were," he said, too loudly to conceal a hint of reproach. Mineko smiled a little smile now for the first time. The meaning of a smile was not clear to Sanshiro. He moved 2 paces closer to them. "Are you going home now?" Neither of them answered him. He took 2 more steps into their direction. "Are you going somewhere else?" "Well, just..." Mineko said softly. He could not hear her clearly. Finally, he came to the rest of the way down the hill until he was standing right in front of them. He simply stood there, however, without pressing for a destination. The crowd let out a roar in the field. "It's the high jump," Yoshiko said. "I wonder how high that one was." Mineko only gave another smile. Sanshiro too remained silent. He had no intention of remarking on the high jump. Mineko asked, "Is there something interesting up there?" Atop the hill there was only the boulder and the rock wall. She should know there was nothing interesting up there. "Nothing at all." "Oh," she answered, as though there was some doubt in her mind. "Let's go up and see," Yoshiko suggested eagerly. "Haven't you been here before?" Mineko asked, unmoved. "Oh, come on." Yoshiko went up first and the others followed. Stepping to the edge of the grass, Yoshiko turned and said with some exaggeration, "It's a sheer cliff," adding, "It's just the kind of place Sappho would have jumped from, don't you think?" Mineko and Sanshiro laughed aloud, but Sanshiro had no idea what kind of Sappho had jumped from. "Why don't you try it too?" Mineko said. "Me? Maybe I should. The water is so dirty though." She came all the way from the edge, and the two began to discuss their errand. "Are you going to?" Mineko asked. "Yes, are you?" "I don't know. What do you think?" "Do whatever you like." "Why don't I go alone? You can wait here. I'll be right back." "I wonder." They could not seem to make up their minds. "What was it?" Sanshiro asked. Yoshiko explained that she was going to pay a courtesy call to the nurse who had taken care of her in the hospital as long as it was so near. In Mineko's care, no obligation was involved, but she has been thinking about visiting a nurse too, someone she had become friendly that summer when a relative was sick. Finally, Yoshiko, in her fresh, uncomplicated way, announced that she would be back soon and stepped swiftly down the hill. There was no need to stop her, no reason to go along. The other two simply remained, or more precisely, were left behind. Sanshiro sat down on the boulder again. Mineko was standing. The surface of the muddy pond caught the autumn sun like a mirror. In the pond was a little island with only 2 trees on it. The green branches of the pine and the pale red of the maple intertwined nicely as in a miniature tree garden. Beyond the island, the dense growth of the trees on the far side of the pond shone with a dark luster. Mineko pointed towards the shadowy place. "Do you know what kind of tree that is?" "That is an oak." Mineko laughed. "So you remember." "Is it the nurse that I saw you with that day? The one you were going to see just now?" "Yes." "She's not the same one as Yoshiko, is she?" "No. She's the one who said this is an oak tree." Now it was Sanshiro's turn to laugh. "Right over there is where you were standing with her, holding a fan." The hill on which they stood jutted into the pond and rose into a considerable height above it. A smaller hill that was in no way connected to this one ran along the bank to the right. From here, they could see the large pine trees, a corner of the mansion, a part of the cloth partition behind the spectator section of the playing field, and beyond it smooth stretch of grass. "Remember how hot it was that day? The hospital was unbearable. I had to go outside for a while. And what were you doing down there?" "It was the heat." I had just met Sohachi for the first time. Then I came out and stayed over here for a while in a kind of a daze. I don't know. I was feeling a little discouraged from meeting Sohachi. No, that's not it, he began, looking at Mineko. Then he changed the subject. Speaking of Sohachi, he's working really hard today, isn't he? Yes, he's even wearing the frock coat. It must be a terrible nuisance for him. The meet goes on all day long. Yes, but he looks pretty pleased with himself. Sohachi? Really? Sanshiro? What do you mean? Well, he's certainly not the kind of man to be pleased with himself as the timer of a track meet. Sanshiro changed the subject again. He came over to say something to you before he didn't he? At the field? Yes, by the fence, he said. But he wanted to take the question back. Yes, she answered and looked steadily at him. Her lower lip began to draw down a smile, which Sanshiro found too much to endure. He was going to say something to divert the conversation again when Mineko said, You still haven't answered my postcard. Embarrassed, he replied, I will. Mineko did not say please do or anything else to encourage him. Do you know the painter Haraguchi? She asked. No, I don't. Oh, really? What about him? Nothing. He was at the meet today, sketching everyone. Sohachi came over to warn us that we better be careful or Haraguchi would draw caricatures of us. Mineko sat down next to Sanshiro. He felt like an awful blockhead. Won't Yoshiko be going home with her brother after the meet? She couldn't if she wanted to. She lives with me now since yesterday. Sanshiro now heard for the first time that Nonomiya's mother had gone home to the country. They had decided that when that happened, they would move out of the Okubo house, Nonomiya would find a room, and Yoshiko would attend school from Mineko's house for the time being. It was the ease with which Nonomiya had taken this step that surprised Sanshiro the most. If he was going to be so casual about living in a room again, he should not have a house to begin with. What had he done with the pans, the rice pot, the buckets, the other household articles? Sanshiro's imagination led him to these irrelevancies which he decided to keep to himself. Nonomiya's reversion from the head of the household to an almost pure student lifestyle was equivalent to his having taken one step back from the family system, and it also gave Sanshiro the personal advantage of shifting his immediate cares to a somewhat greater distance. On the other hand, Yoshiko had gone to live with Mineko. Sohachi and Yoshiko were kind of like a brother and sister who had to be seeing each other constantly. As their visits continued, the relationship between Nonomiya and Mineko would gradually take on a new character. Then, who was to say when the time would come for Nonomiya to end the rooming house life a second time and forever? Sanshiro carried on his conversation with Mineko while painting his dubious picture of the future in his head. The strain of presenting a normal exterior was beginning to prove painful when, fortunately, Yoshiko came back. The two women talked about going to the track meet again, but this autumn day was swiftly drawing to a close, the sun's decline bringing with it a gradual increase in the chill of the open air. They decided to go home. Sanshiro thought that he would take his leave and return to his rooming house alone, but the three of them moved off together talking, which gave him no clear opportunity to say goodbye. He felt as if they were pulling him along, and he was perfectly happy to be pulled along. He stuck with them, skirting the edge of the pond, moving past the library towards the red gate, which lay in the wrong direction. Nearing the gate, he said to Yoshiko, I hear your brother has taken a room. Yes, he finally did it. Fobbing his poor sister off on Mineko. Isn't he terrible? She said this as though she wanted Sanshiro's sympathy. He was about to answer when Mineko spoke up in praise of Nonomiya. A man like Sohachi is beyond our understanding. He's so far above us, thinking about great things. Yoshiko listened in silence. It was all for the sake of research that academics had to keep aloof from the life's annoying trivia and content themselves with as uncomplicated as an existence as possible. Mineko continued. Finally, it was a mark of greatness that a man like Nonomiya, whose work was known even in foreign countries, should be living in an ordinary student rooming house. The shabbier the rooming house, the more he was to be respected. Sanshiro left his two companions at the red gate. As he turned his step towards Oiwake, he started thinking. Mineko was right. The difference between Nonomiya and himself was enormous. He had just arrived from the country. He had just entered the university. He possessed no learning, no discrimination to speak of. It was only natural that he could not command the same respect from Mineko as Nonomiya did. Come to think of it, she might even be laughing at him. When he said before that he had come to the hill because the track meet bored him, he had asked with a straight face if there was something interesting up there. He had not noticed it then, but she might have been deliberately toying with him. Now, reviewing one by one the things she had said to him, the way she had acted towards him until today, he realized that everything could be given a negative interpretation. Right there in the middle of the street, he blushed scarlet and hung his head. Looking up again, he found Yojiro coming towards him with the student he had spoken at last night's dinner. Yojiro nodded once to him and said nothing. The student removed his hat and bowed. Glad you came yesterday. How are things? Don't surrender yourself now. He laughed and walked on with Yojiro. That was the end of chapter 6. We have chapter 7 and 8 to go. Detivambula. I don't know how to pronounce that, but I'll try my best. Oh my god. Let me stretch. So I got my tattoo yesterday, and they put me in a very, very awkward position to get it done, and now I'm having like a full body ache, like just my arms and everything. It's terrible. Even my neck hurts. I'm not even kidding. Like, I don't even know how that happened. Sorry. Yeah. Sanshiro is a pussy. Sorry. Yes. That's my opinion of him. But it's okay. He's a country boy. He doesn't know how to act around city people. I understand that feeling. I was a country girl too. You know, came from a small town to a big city and just feel very, very overwhelmed with everything. That's me. Haha. It's me in my early 20s. Oh, I just revealed how old I am. Fuck. Anyway, chapter 7. For those who just come in, who just logged in, we are indeed reading NatsumeSōseki's Sanshiro. It was written and published in I keep saying 18, idiot. It was written and published on 1908 to 1909. Yep. But a lot of it is still very, very relevant to this day. Whew. Okay, chapter 7, let's go. Yojiro had not been home since yesterday. The old servant woman told Sanshiro in hushed tones. He stood at the kitchen door, thinking until it finally occurred to her to invite him in. The professor was in his study, she said, her hands busily washing dishes as she spoke. The professor must have just finished eating dinner. Sanshiro went through the sitting room to the hall and down to Professor's study. The door was open. "Come in here," the professor barked. Sanshiro crossed the threshold. The professor was at his desk, his long back hiding his work. Sanshiro knelt on the matted floor by the doorway. "You must be busy studying," he said politely. The professor twisted himself around, and the shadow of his mustache indistinct and shaggy. Sanshiro thought he looked like the portrait of someone he had seen in printed photograph. "Oh, it's you. I thought it was Yojiro. Sorry." He left his seat. On the desk were a writing brush and a paper. So he had been writing. Yojiro had told him once that the professor often worked on certain manuscript, but that is something the author alone could understand. "I hope he can turn it into a magnum opus during his lifetime. But if he dies first, it will just be a pile of scrap paper," he had said with a sigh. Oh my god. This is like NatsumeSōseki's like supposed magnum opus, Like and Duck, that was never finished. But it wasn't really a pile of scrap paper. They actually tried to publish it, even though it was unfinished. "I can leave you if you're busy. It's nothing special." "No, I'm not busy enough to send you away. This is nothing special either. I don't have to finish it now." Sanshiro could not find anything to say for the moment. He thought to himself how good it would be to see things as the professor saw them. And studying would be so easy then. "Actually, I came to see Yojiro," he said at last. "Oh, of course. I guess he's been out since yesterday. He wanders off like that now and then. I wish he wouldn't." "Did something came up?" "Nothing ever just comes up with Yojiro. He makes them come up. It's a rare sort of idiocy." All that and Sanshiro could say was, "He takes things easy, doesn't he?" "No. I wish he did take things easy. He can't keep his mind on any one thing. He's like the stream near the Dangozaka, shallow and narrow, the water constantly changing. There's no discipline to what he does. If we go to a temple fair to look at the stalls, he would have brainstorms and tell me to buy something crazy like a dwarf pine. Before I can answer him, he bargained the price down and bought it. I have to admit though, he always gets a good deal at these flea markets. But no sooner he had spent my money and he locked up the house in the summer and left the pine inside. When we come back, the heat has killed it and turned it bright red. He's like that with everything. I don't know what to do with him." Sounds like Yojiro has ADHD. I'm sorry. Sounds like someone has ADHD. Sanshiro had recently lent Yojiro 20 yen. Yojiro said he was due to receive a manuscript fee from the literary review in 2 weeks, and he wanted the loan until then. His compassion aroused. Sanshiro took 5 yen from the money order that had just arrived from his mother, and gave Yojiro the rest. The money was not due yet, but Hirota's story was making Sanshiro a little uneasy. He could hardly reveal such a thing to the professor, however, and instead he came to Yojiro's defense. "Still, Yojiro has enormous respect for you, Professor, and he's going all out for you behind the scene." The professor turned serious. "What do you mean he's going all out for me?" Sanshiro had been given strict orders not to tell the Professor Hirota about the Great Darkness or any of Yojiro's other activities on his behalf. The professor was sure to get angry if he found out what was going on. They had to keep it quiet while things were still in the progress. And when time came to let him know, Yojiro himself would be the one to tell him. Sanshiro changed the subject. There were many things that brought Sanshiro to the Hirota's house. First of all was the unusual way Professor Hirota lived. Indeed, certain aspects of his life were utterly incompatible with Sanshiro's temperament. Thus, it was partly curiosity that brought him here. He wanted to study Professor to find out how one manages to turn out that way. Next was the fact that Hirota's presence made him relax and forget about the competitive way of the world. Nonomiya was like Hirota in having something otherworldly about him, but in Nonomiya's case, it seems that ambitions, albeit otherworldly ambitions, were what kept him aloof from the conventional appetites. Thus, whenever Sanshiro talked with Nonomiya alone, he would feel that he too must hurry into a full-fledged career and make his contributions to the scholarly world. It was unsettling, irritating. On that score, Hirota was tranquility itself. He taught language in the college. That was all. He had no other accomplishments. A disrespectful thing to say, it was true, but he published no research and was not in the least concerned about it. Therein lay the source of his easy manner, perhaps. Lately, Sanshiro had become captive of a woman. He had surrendered himself to her. It would be pleasant enough if they were lovers, but this was an incomprehensible kind of surrender. He did not know if he was being loved or laughed at, whether he would be terrified or contemptuous, whether he should end it or keep going. He was angry and frustrated, and there was no one better for him at such times as Hirota. Half an hour with Professor Hirota and all his tensions are gone. To hell with women. It was mainly for this that Sanshiro had came here tonight. There was a serious contradiction in the third of Sanshiro's reason for visiting Professor Hirota. He was suffering over Mineko. The thought of Nonomiya with Mineko only increased the suffering. The person who knew Nonomiya best was the professor, which meant that by coming to see him, the nature of the relationship between Nonomiya and Mineko would become clear to Sanshiro as a matter of course. If their relationship were clarified, Sanshiro would be able to adopt a definite attitude. In spite of all this, Sanshiro had never asked the professor about them. Tonight, he decided he would give it a try. Nonomiya has taken a room, I hear. So he tells me. I would think that someone who has lived in his own house would hate to move back into a room. I am surprised Nonomiya could do that. Yes, he's oblivious to such things. You can tell by the way he's dressed. There's nothing domestic about him. He's very demanding with his research though. Do you think he plans to live there very long? Who knows? Maybe he'll take another house all of a sudden. Do you think he plans to take a wife? Maybe so. Why don't you find somebody nice for him? Sanshiro forced a smile. He should never have started this. What are your plans? Me? I'm still too young, of course. You shouldn't have a wife at your age. That's what they are pushing me to do at home. Who are they? My mother? Do you want to know? Do you want to do what she says? Not really. Hirota's teeth appeared below his mustache in a broad smile. They were rather nice teeth. Sanshiro suddenly felt very close to Hirota. The feeling had nothing to do with Mineko, nothing to do with Nonomiya. It was a closeness that transcended any immediate advantage to him and made him ashamed to go on asking these questions. You ought to listen to your mother, Professor Hirota began. Young men nowadays are too self-aware. Their egos are too strong. Unlike the young men of my own days, when I was a student, there wasn't a thing we did that was unrelated to others. It was all for the emperor, or our parents, or the country, or the society. Everything was other-centered, which means that all educated men were hypocrites. When society changed, hypocrisy stopped working, as a result of which we started importing self-centeredness into thought and action, and egoism became enormously developed. Instead of the old hypocrites, now we all have our hypervillains. Have you ever heard of the word hypervillains before? No, I have not. That's because I just made it up. Even you are, maybe not. Yes, you are probably a hypervillain. Yojiro, of course, is an extreme example. And you know Satome Mineko. She's kind of a hypervillain. Then there's Nozomiya's sister, an interesting variation in her own way. The only hypervillains we needed in the old days were the feudal lords and fathers. Now, with equal rights, everybody wants to be one. Not that it's a bad thing, of course. We all know. Take the lid off something that stings, you'll find a manure bucket. Tear away the pretty formalities, the bad is out in the open. Formalities are just a bother. So everyone economizes. Sorry. So everyone economizes and make do with the plain stuff. It is actually quite exhilarating. Natural ugliness is in all its glory. Of course, when there's too much glory, the hypervillains get a little annoyed with each other. When their discomfort reaches peak, altruism is resurrected, and when that becomes a mere formality and turns sour, egoism comes back, and so on ad infinitum. That's how we go on living, you might say. That's how we progress. Look at England. Egoism and altruism have been in perfect balance there for centuries. That's why she doesn't move. That's why she doesn't progress. The English are a pitiful lot. They have no Ibsen, no Nietzsche's. They are all puffed up like that. But look at them from the outside and you can see them hardening, turning into fossils. Sanshiro was impressed by all this, by the way, but he was a little surprised at how the conversation had switched track and was running full speed in the wrong direction. At last, Hirota too became aware of what had happened. What were we talking about? Marriage. Oh, marriage? Yes, that I ought to listen to my mother. Oh yes, that's it. You really ought to listen to your mother, he said, grinning as if to a child. Sanshiro was not angered by this, however. I see what you mean about my generation being hypervillains, but not about yours being hypocrites. Look, do you like it when people are kind to you? Yes, I suppose I do. Are you sure? I don't. There are times when people are tremendously kind to me and I hate it. When is that? When the formalities look kind, but kindness itself is not the person's intention. Does that ever happen? Tell me, do you really feel happy when somebody wishes you Happy New Year? Well, you don't you? Good morning, Skopaki. Sorry, I'm on take a break. Hello! We are currently reading NatsumeSōseki's Sanshiro, Chapter 7. I'm glad you made it. If you have not heard the previous reading, you can always go back to my VOD and listen to it. It's better to listen to it on YouTube because it loads better on YouTube. Don't worry. Don't worry, Skopaki. Let us continue. Where did I stop? You don't you? It's the same when people tell you they are splitting their sides or rolling over with laughter. No one is really laughing. Be kind to people is like that. Some of us do it mechanically. Take my teaching for example. My real purpose is to make a living, but students wouldn't see it that way. Meanwhile, there's Yojiro, the leader of hypervillains. He causes me all kind of trouble, but he's not malicious. He's actually sort of lovable, like the Americans, the way they are so brutally frank about money. The thing itself is their goal. There's nothing as honest as an action taken with the thing itself as the goal, and there is nothing less hateful than honesty. Restraint was the main thing my generation was taught, so none of us knows how to approach things honestly without affectation. My God, what a good quote. Sorry. Whenever I see a good quote, I have to highlight it because it's really good. I'll come back to read it again and again. Sanshiro was able to follow the argument this far. The urgent question confronting him now, however, was not a matter of general reasoning. He wanted to know whether a very particular individual had actual dealings was being honest with him. He thought again about Mineko's behavior towards him, but he could not decide if it had been affected or not. Sanshiro began to suspect that his perceptions might be twice as dull as everyone else's. Oh yes, Hirota said, as if suddenly recalling something. There's more. Something very odd has come into fashion since the start of the 20th century of ours. A convoluted tactic of fulfilling the needs of altruism through egoism. Have you come across anybody who does that? Oh, who does what? Okay, here, let me put it differently. It is the use of hypervillainy to practice hypocrisy. You still don't get it, do you? Maybe I'm not explaining it well. Look, the old-fashioned hypocrite wants, above all, for others to think well of him, right? But there is a type of man who's just opposite of this. He will purposely practice hypocrisy when he wants to hurt another person's feeling. He will act in such a way that the other person couldn't possibly fail to see how hypocritical he is being. The other person feels bad, of course, and so he accomplishes his purpose. The honesty in conveying one's hypocrisy to the other person for what it is, this is honesty. This honesty is the distinguishing feature of the hypervillain. And since all of one's speech and action appear on the surface to be good, it is kind of not a trinity, not 3 in 1, but 2 in 1. The number of people who can use this technique skillfully seems to have increased greatly in recent years. For civilized race whose sensibilities have grown extraordinarily acute, this is the best technique for achieving the most refined hypervillainy. It's a barbaric situation when you can't kill someone without spilling blood. Sooner or later it's going to go out of style. Professor Hirota spoke like a tour guide describing an old battlefield, putting himself in the position of one who has witnessed the actual events from a distant vantage point. He spoke with a ring of an affirmation, evoking the mood of the lecture hall, but it had its effect on Sanshiro, for he could apply Hirota's theory immediately to the woman who filled his thoughts. He set up the standard in his mind and measured everything about her against it. Yet, still, there was so much beyond measurement. The professor closed his mouth and started blowing the customary philosophical smoke from his nostrils. 1 second. Just then, footsteps sounded in the hallway. Someone walked in without knocking and came down the hall. A moment later, Yojiro was kneeling at the door of the study. Mr. Haraguchi is here, Yojiro said, nothing about his own belated return, perhaps with good reason. To Sanshiro, he tendered only a curt nod, and then he went out again. Haraguchi stepped inside, passing Yojiro at the threshold. He wore a Van Dyke and moustache in the French style and had close-cropped hair, and he carried a good deal of fat on him. He looked 2 or 3 years older than Nonomiya. His kimono was far handsomer than Professor Hirota's. Well, it's been quite a while, hasn't it? Haraguchi said. Sasaki has been at my place, and we have been eating and whatnot. He finally dragged me over here. Haraguchi had an affirmative way of speaking and a voice that naturally brightened the spirits of anyone in his vicinity. Sanshiro had been fairly certain the Haraguchi announced by Yojiro was the painter whose name he had heard on occasion. What a gregarious creature Yojiro was. Sanshiro felt a wave of admiration for the way Yojiro made friends with so many older men. Then he grew stiff. Sanshiro always grew stiff in the presence of his seniors. He interpreted this to be a result of his Kyushu-style education. Hirota introduced him to Haraguchi. Sanshiro bowed respectfully and received an easy nod in return. After that, he listened to the man's conversation without a word. Haraguchi said that he had only one item of business and he would take care of that first. He was going to hold a dinner in the future and he wanted Hirota to come. It was to be a simple, casual affair. The invitations would go to a limited number of writers and artists and university professors, mostly people who knew each other, so there would be absolutely no need of formality. The purpose was simply to have dinner together and to exchange edifying literary conversation afterwards. That was about all. He would join them, Professor Hirota answered simply. Thus, dispensing with Haraguchi's business, the rest of the conversation was much more interesting. Ooh, you know what I like about Soseki's novels is when he writes conversations. He writes extremely great conversations. Okay, hang on. Coffee? Okay, let's go. What have you been doing these days? Professor Hirota asked. I sound like a fucking valley girl. What are we doing these days? Oh my god. Fucking hell. Okay, sorry. So annoying. What have you been doing these days? Professor Hirota asked. I'm still singing Itsubushi. I've already memorized 5 pieces. Some good ones like 8 Yoshiwara scenes in blossoms and fall colors, and Koina and Hanbei's love suicide Karasaki. You ought to give it a try yourself. They tell me it's bad style to sing too loud though. Itsubushi was originally performed in a small private chambers, but you know me, I'm always loud, and these songs have such intricate melodies I can never get them right. You'll hear me sing sometime. Professor Hirota was smiling. Haraguchi went on. Bad as I am though, Satomi Kyosuke is even worse. He can't get a single tune right. I wonder why. His sister is such a talented girl. The other day he said he couldn't stand it anymore. He was going to quit singing and take up an instrument. Somebody suggested he try the Idiot's Delight. They said he'd probably do better banging away on some noisemaker in a shrine festival. It was hilarious. They really said that? Really? And Satomi actually said that he would do it if I would. It's not as easy as you think though. There are supposedly 8 different styles of Idiot's Delight. Why don't you try it? It sounds like something an ordinary human being could manage. No thanks. I would rather take up the no drum. I don't know. When I hear the plop of the little drum, I feel I'm not in the 20th century anymore. I like that. I mean, how can anything be so delightfully half-witted in times like this? It's great medicine just to stop and think about that. I may be easygoing, but I could never produce a painting like the sound of the drum. I'll bet you never tried. I couldn't do it. How could anyone living in Tokyo now paint something so serene? Of course, it is not only painting, which reminds me. I wanted to do a caricature of Satomi and Nonomiya sisters at the track meet the other day, but they ran out on me. I'm planning to do a formal portrait soon and show it in an exhibition. Whose portrait? Satomi's sister. The usual Japanese woman has an utama rosao, or such a face that's all right for woodblock prints, but doesn't look good on canvas. Satomi's sister though, and Nonomiya's, could be painted. I'm planning to do a life-size painting of Mineko holding a round fan and facing into the sunlight with some woods in the background. A Western folding fan would be in a bad taste, but a round Japanese fan would be novel and interesting. In any case, I had better hurry up. She could get married soon, and then I probably couldn't run things my way. Sanshiro listened to Haraguchi with great interest. When he heard the painting that would have Mineko holding up a fan, he was profoundly moved. Some mysterious, fateful bond must exist between them, he felt. That doesn't sound like a very interesting picture to me, Hirota said frankly. But that's how she wanted it. When she suggested holding up a fan, I thought it would be unusual and agreed to paint it that way. It's not a bad idea. It all depends on how it's done. Watch out what you don't make her too beautiful. She'll get more marriage proposal than she can handle. Good point, Haraguchi laughed. I'll give the medium treatment. Speaking of marriage, she's just about that age. Do you know any likely prospects? Satomi has been asking me to keep my eyes open. What about you, Haraguchi? Me? I wouldn't mind, but I don't have much standing with her, I'm afraid. Why not? I think her brother tells stories about me. She heard how I stock up on Japanese food when I went to Europe. I told everybody I was determined to barricade myself in my room in Paris. So Mineko laughed at me and said, the minute you got there, you changed your spots. She's too much for me. Mineko wouldn't marry anyone she doesn't want to, and she won't be pushed. The best thing will be to let her stay single until she finds somebody she likes. Strictly Western style. Of course, all women will be like that from now on. Nothing wrong with it. Then Haraguchi and Hirota talked at length about painting. Sanshiro was amazed at how many Western painters named Professor Hirota knew. Soon it was time for him to leave. As he was searching for his clocks at the back door, the professor came to the bottom of the staircase. Hey, Sasaki! Come down here for a minute, he called. It was cold outside. The sky so high and clear it almost made him wonder where the morning dew would come from. Whenever his hand brushed against the silk of his kimono, the spot of skin felt a chill. He walked down a deserted lane after another and turning a corner encountered a roadside fortune teller. The man held a large round paper lantern that made him bright red from the waist down. Sanshiro suddenly wanted to buy a fortune, but he suppressed the impulse and let the man pass. Taking such a care to avoid the red lantern on his shoulder brushed against the cedar fence. A little farther on, he cut across the dark area and came out to Oiwake's main street. There was a noodle shop on the corner. This time, Sanshiro followed his impulse and ducked under the curtain in the doorway. He wanted a drink. There were 3 college students in the shop. One of them was saying that many professors had begun eating noodles for lunch recently. The delivery boys would come rushing into the school grounds as soon as the noon gun sounded, balancing stacks of baskets and bowls on their shoulders. This particular shop was probably doing a lot of business that way. One of the professors ate boiling hot noodles even in summer. Why would he do such a thing? He probably had a bad stomach. The 3 students went on like this, referring to the professors by their last name only. One of them mentioned Hirota, which studies. Oh my god, I haven't seen you in a long time. Go take a seat. Take a seat. Today we are reading NatsumeSōseki's Sanshiro, Chapter 7. We're currently on Chapter 7. Okay? Okay. One of them mentioned Hirota, which started discussion about why Hirota was still a bachelor. The opinion was expressed that he probably did not hate women because he had a nude picture hanging on his office wall. Of course, it was a Western nude, so that didn't prove anything. Perhaps he hated Japanese women? No. He must have been disappointed in love. Maybe that's what made him so eccentric. Was it true that some beautiful young women often visited him? Before long, the students began saying what an extraordinary man Hirota was. Sanshiro could not tell why they thought him so extraordinary, but all 3 of them had read Yojiro's The Great Darkness and admitted that the essay was what had started them liking Hirota. There were quotations of some Yojiro's aphorisms followed by enthusiastic praise of his style. Who could be the mysterious A Propagule be? Who could be the mysterious A Propagule be? In any case, they agreed. He must be someone who knew Hirota very well. This conversation cleared the air for Sanshiro. He felt new admiration for Yojiro in his decision to write The Great Darkness. Until now, he had doubted any purpose other than gratification of Yojiro's ego could be served by the flaunting of his major essays in a journal that, by his own admission, sold poorly. But as he listened to the students, Sanshiro was awakened to the power of the printed world. What Yojiro said was true. Writing anything, however modest, was better than not writing at all. I need to highlight this quote. It's a very good quote. This was where man's reputation were made or broken. Sanshiro left the noodle shop overawed at the responsibility of those who wield the pen. The effect of the sake had worn off by the time Sanshiro reached his lodgings. Everything was so stupid, somehow. He was sitting at his desk, blank, when the maid came upstairs with a fresh kettle and a letter for him. It was from his mother again. He opened it immediately. Today, he was overjoyed at the sight of his mother's handwriting. The letter was a long one, but it had nothing much to say. He was particularly pleased that his mother said nothing about Miwata or Mitsu. She had included a strange bit of advice, however. Quote, "You have been cowardly since childhood. This is a terrible disadvantage, and it must make examinations and such very trying for you. You know what made a good scholar and middle school teacher Okitsutaka is? But every time he takes the qualifying examination, the poor man trembles and can never write good answers, so his pay never goes up. He asked a friend of his, a medical school graduate, I think, to make some pill that would stop the trembling, and he took them before the examination, but he trembled just the same. I don't think yours is so bad that you tremble, but you ought to have some of those Tokyo doctors make you something that you can take regularly to give you some nerves. It just might work." Sanshiro found her advice ludicrous. Which, man, his mother just dissed on him, man. It's like a rap diss, man. His mother just fucking dissed on his son, man. Hey, King! Hey! Nice to see you. Oh my god. A lot of people here now. So sorry, I keep stopping. Anyway, we are reading the part where Sanshiro's mother just dissed on his son, calling him a coward. It was great. Sanshiro found her advice ludicrous, which made it all the more comforting. Mothers were so kind. He stayed up until 1 o'clock that night writing to his mother a long letter. In it was the sentence, "Tokyo is not a very interesting place." That's the end of chapter 7. We have chapter 8 to go before we end the stream. Yeah, I've been really busy. Actually, okay, I'm not gonna say that I'm busy. I'm like, life happens sometimes, and then when life happens, right, it just takes away the motivation to do anything. So that's why this quote from the book, "Writing anything, however modest, was better than not writing at all." So it's the same with doing a stream. It's better than not doing a stream at all. So that's why I'm here. If that makes sense. Anyway, story so far. Sanshiro is kind of in love with Mineko, but Mineko is being very nonchalant, like, mixed messages, I guess. I don't know. I don't think she's giving mixed messages. I just think that Sanshiro is overthinking it. And overthinking is never good in any sense at all. So, yeah. And he is slowly kind of like, fitting into Tokyo. Since he's from Kumamoto, he's like slowly fitting into the scene of Tokyo, and then having friends and making friends with, like, his peers, and also some professors and all that, which is very interesting. um NatsumeSōseki's books are like very oh, you're still here.
Stretch.
Okay, I'll stretch. NatsumeSōseki's books are very interesting in the sense that it's like you're just reading like a, I don't know, like a everyday book, I guess. I like it's just like it's very what's the word for it? Oh my god, I can't think of a word for it. Very quaint. It's very quaint. I think quaint is a good word to describe Soseki's books. It always seems like it's not. Thank you so much. I'm gonna drink my coffee. The rest of my coffee. It always seems like the story is not going anywhere, but it's actually going somewhere. Like, you are watching a character being developed. There's actual character development in his books. A small country boy comes to the city, fall in love with the making friends with the city people, and fall in love with the city girl, but overthinks her signals and everything and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, and it's true, he's a coward. But I don't know if there's a way to justify his cowardice. Sorry, my English is bad. His cowardice. I think he's just being careful and not. But he overthinks a lot, and I can relate with that, the overthinking. Anyway, let us finish today's reading session with chapter 8. For those who just joined in right now, we are currently reading chapter 8 of NatsumeSōseki's Sanshiro. Chapter 8. Let us start now. This is how Sanshiro came to lend Yojiro money. At 9 o'clock on a rainy evening several days earlier, Yojiro had paid Sanshiro an unexpected visit. The first words from Yojiro's mouth were, "I'm done for." Sanshiro had never seen him look so pale. At first, he thought Yojiro might have been out too long in the chilling autumn storm. But when Yojiro sat down, Sanshiro realized that more was wrong with him than his color. It was in uncharacteristically low spirit. "Are you sick?" Yojiro blinked twice, his eyes skittish as tears, and answered, "I'm in trouble. I lost some money." With a worried look, he blew 2 or 3 streams of smoke from his nostrils. Sanshiro could not simply wait in silence for Yojiro to explain himself. How much money? Where had he lost it? As soon as the last stream of smoke was gone, Yojiro told the whole story without a break. He had lost 20 yen. Worst of all, it was someone else's money. When Professor Hirota moved into the house in which he was living the year before, he was unable to pay the entire deposit of 3 months' rent and borrowed the difference from Nonomiya. This was the money that Nonomiya had asked his father to send him from the country to buy Yoshiko a violin. There was, therefore, no pressing deadline by which the money had to be repaid, but the longer it was postponed, the more Yoshiko would be inconvenienced. And in fact, she still did not have her violin because Professor Hirota had not returned the money. He would have repaid it if he had been able to, but month followed on month with nothing to spare, since Hirota was not a man to work for anything beyond his salary, he simply let it go. Just recently, however, he had at last received 60 yen due to him grading the college summer entrance examination. It was with this that he intended to discharge his obligation, and the task of delivering the money had fallen to Yojiro. That's the money I lost. It's unforgivable. Yojiro looked as though he really felt he had done something unforgivable. Do you have any idea where you dropped it? Dropped it? I bet it all on horses. Sanshiro was astounded. Even indiscretion had its limits, but Yojiro had so overshot them that Sanshiro could not bring himself to admonish him. And besides, Yojiro was so very downcast. Comparing him now with his usual ebullient self, one would have had to conclude that there were two Yojiros. The contrast was simply too violent, provoking a simultaneous onslaught of amusement and pity that threw Sanshiro and then Yojiro into a fit of laughter. Oh well, Yojiro said, I guess it will all work out. Does the professor know? Not yet. Nonomiya? Of course not. When did you get the money? The first of the month, just 2 weeks ago today. And when did you bet it on the horses? The day after that. And you have just let it go all this time? No! I've been running all over trying to come up with something. If I have to, I can't let it go until the end of the month. Do you have the money coming in then? The literary review should be paying me. Sanshiro stood up and opened his drawer. I've got some money here, he said, looking at the envelope containing his mother's recent letter from home. My mother was early this month. Dear, sweet Ogawa, a prince among men! Yojiro responded like a professional Tokyo storyteller, his voice suddenly full of life. Braving the storm, the two made their way to the main street of Oiwake after 10 o'clock and went to the noodle shop on the corner. It was then that Sanshiro learned to drink sake at noodle shops. Both of them drank with pleasure that night. Yojiro paid the check. He was never one to let others pay for him. Nearly 10 days later, Yojiro still had not returned the 20 yen. Sanshiro was too honest not to worry about paying the rent. He did not press Yojiro for the money, but he kept wishing that he would do something about it. And soon, the end of the month was less than 2 days away. It never occurred to Sanshiro to hold off paying the rent in case something went wrong. Yojiro would bring the money without fail. No, of course. Sanshiro did not have that much confidence in him, but he told himself that Yojiro had at least enough kindness to try to work things out. Hirota had said that Yojiro's mind was always on the move like shallow water, but if all that movement involved ignoring his responsibilities, Sanshiro was going to be very upset. No, Yojiro couldn't be that bad. Sanshiro was looking down the street from his second-story window when Yojiro appeared in the distance, approaching swiftly. He came as far as the house and looked up at Sanshiro. You're in? Sanshiro looked down, replied, I'm in. This vertical exchange of ridiculous greetings completed, Sanshiro pulled his head in and Yojiro pounded his way upstairs. I'll bet you have been on the lookout for me and worrying about the rent. I know you. That's why I've been running all over the place. What a stupid business. Did you get your money from the review? What money? They don't owe me anything. Didn't you tell me that they were going to pay you at the end of the month? Did I? You must have misunderstood. I had everything I'm going to get out of them. That's funny. I'm sure you said that they would pay you. I said I was going to get an advance, a loan, but they won't give it to me. The bastards don't think I would pay it back. And it's only 20 yen. I wrote The Great Darkness for them and they still don't trust me. I'm sick of them. So you didn't get any money? Not from them. I got it from somebody else. I thought you'd be in trouble if I didn't. Oh, sorry I put you through that. But there's a catch. I don't have the money. You have to go and get it. Huh? Where is it? Well, when the review turned me down, I went to see the Haraguchi and a few other people, but none of them could manage it for the end of the month. I finally went to Satomi's. I guess you don't know him. Satomi Kyosuke, law graduate, Mineko's brother. Anyway, he was out, so nothing came of that either. By then, I was hungry and didn't feel like walking around on empty stomach, so I stayed and talked to Mineko. Wasn't Yoshiko there? Of course not. It was just afternoon and she was at school. Besides, we were in a drawing room, so it wouldn't have made any difference. Oh, I see. So, Mineko agreed to lend you the money? Does she have her own money? That I wouldn't know. Anyhow, it's all set. She said she would do it. And the funny way she has of acting like everybody's big sister, you can relax once you agree to go along. There's nothing to worry about. All you have to do is to ask politely. But what a shock at the end. She said she had the money, but she couldn't give it to me. I asked her, don't you trust me? She said no. And she was smiling. She's too much. I asked if I should send you over, and she said yes. She would give it to you. Let her do it any way she likes. Don't you think you can go and get it? If I don't go, I'll have to wire my mother. Forget it. A telegram now would be stupid. Even you can't do that much, I'm sure. I can't do it. This took care of 20 yen. Once that had been dispensed with, Yojiro began a report on the Hirota affair. The campaign was making steady progress. Yojiro was visiting concerned students one at a time in their rooming houses whenever he had a chance. Individual discussions were the only way. When a lot of people got together, each one would come up with their own idea just to assert himself, or else he would feel slighted and act indifferent. Individual discussion were absolutely the only way. On the other hand, they took time and money. But if he was going to worry about that, there would be no campaign. Another thing, he was trying not to introduce Professor Hirota's name into the discussion too often. If the others thought this was all for the sake of Hirota and not for the students themselves, everything would fall apart. This was his technique for advancing the campaign, Yojiro said. Everything had gone well up to now. They had reached to the point of convincing everyone that having only Westerners on the faculty was no longer acceptable, and that a Japanese must be brought in to teach foreign literature. All they had to do now was hold another large meeting, choose some delegates, and send them to voice the students' desires to the dean, the president, and others. Of course, the meeting itself was just a formality and could be dispensed with, since they knew pretty well which students would be the delegates. All were sympathetic to Professor Hirota. Depending on the progress of the negotiations, they might even bring up the professor's name. Yojiro sounded as though he had the world in his grasp. Sanshiro was not a little impressed with his abilities. Yojiro then talked about his having brought Haraguchi to see Professor the other night. You remember how Haraguchi urged the professor to attend the dinner for literary men? Sanshiro remembered, of course. That too had been organized by Yojiro. He had many reasons for doing it, he said, but the most immediate one was that an influential professor in the Department of Literature would be at the dinner. It would be a tremendous advantage to the professor to bring him and the other men together at this juncture. Eccentric that he was, the professor did not go out of his way to mix with others, but if Yojiro could arrange suitable opportunities to bring him in contact with people, then, in his own eccentric way, the professor would associate with them. That's what that's all was all about. Oh my god, what is this? So that's what that was all about. Oh my god. I had no idea. You say you're the organizer, but all of those important men going to come when they get an invitation from you? Yojiro turned a somber gaze on Sanshiro. Then, a sour smile, he looked away. Don't talk nonsense. It was my idea, but no one's going to know that. I suggested it to Haraguchi and arranged for him to use his influence. Oh, I see. Oh, I see. I can still smell the farm on you. Anyhow, you ought to go to the dinner yourself. It should be soon now. What's the point of me mixing with all those important men? I think I'll skip it. There's that farm smell again. The only difference between an important and a not so important man is the order in which they entered the society. You hear that so-and-so has a doctorate and such is a university graduate, but you meet him and he's like anybody else. They don't go around thinking how important they are. You really ought to come to the dinner. It could do you good in the future. Where is it going to be? Probably the Seiyoken in Ueno. I've never been a place like that. It's going to be expensive, isn't it? Well, maybe 2 yen each, but don't worry, if you don't have the money, I'll pay for you. Sanshiro thought about the 20 yen, but strangely enough, it no longer seemed funny. Yojiro suggested to go to a restaurant on the Ginza for tempura. I've got money, he said. What a strange fellow, Sanshiro, who usually went along with anything, refused this time. Instead, they took a walk. They stopped in at Okano's confectionery on the way back. Yojiro bought a lot of little chestnut jam pastries. They were for the professor, he said, and he went off clutching a bagful. That night, Sanshiro gave some thought to Yojiro's character. What was that? How you turned out after living in Tokyo for a long time? Then he thought about going to Satomi's house for a loan. He was glad of the new excuse to see Mineko, but he didn't like the idea of approaching anyone for money, hat in hand. It would be a whole new experience for him, complicated by the fact that the lender was a girl, not an independent person. Perhaps she did have her own money, but if she were to lend it to Sanshiro in secret without her brother's permission, it might later prove to be an embarrassment for her, if not for him. Knowing Mineko, though, everything might well have been arranged from the start so as not to become an embarrassment. In any case, he would go to see her, and if it looked as though borrowing the money would be unpleasant, he would refuse it, delaying the payment of the rent for a few days and have the money sent from home, thus ending this matter. His thought came this far and took a new turn, filling his head with images of Mineko, her face, her hands, her neckline, the obi, the kimono she wore. His imagination multiplied and divided. He thought especially about their meeting tomorrow. How would she act towards him? What would she say? She saw 10, 20 versions of the scene. Sanshiro had always been like this. Whenever he had to see someone on business, his imagination would concentrate on how the other person would act. He never thought about himself, the look on his own face, and the things that he would say, the tone of his voice, until afterward. Then he never failed to think of them with regret. Tonight, especially, he had no imagination to spare for himself. He had been having doubts about Mineko, but simply doubting her would never solve anything. On the other hand, he had no question to confront her with, no Gordian knots to slash. If a solution was necessary for Sanshiro's peace of mind, it involved nothing more than exploiting this chance to see Mineko in order to allow himself one final precarious judgment based on her behavior towards him. Tomorrow's interview would supply him with the indispensable data for that judgment. And so now he tried to imagine what she would be like. The scenes he came up with, however, were always favorable to himself, and as such, their accuracy was highly suspect. Each was like a handsome photograph of an ugly place. A photograph might be accurate in every way, but it would never be the same as the indisputably ugly original. In the end, a pleasant thought occurred to Sanshiro. Mineko had agreed to lend him the 20 yen, but he would not give it to Yojiro. Yojiro might as well be untrustworthy when it comes to money, but had that been her reason to refuse to give it to him? If not, this meant something very promising for Sanshiro. Her willingness to lend it to him was in itself sufficient indication that she thought well of him. But the fact that she insisted on handing it to him in person, he dared to allow himself this much conceit when a new thought struck him. Isn't she just toying with me again? It was enough to make him turn bright red. If someone were to ask him why Mineko would bother toying with him, Sanshiro could not have found an answer. Pressed to think of one, perhaps he could have replied that Mineko was the kind of woman who enjoyed toying with men. It would never have occurred to him, surely, that he did it to punish his conceit. which he believed was caused by Mineko's in the first place. With two instructors absent the following day, Sanshiro was relieved of classes for the afternoon. He did not bother going back to his rooming house for lunch, but instead made do with a light snack on the way to Mineko's. He had walked past her house any number of times, but had never gone inside. Satomi Kyosuke said the nameplate on the pillar of the tiled roof gate. What was Satomi Kyosuke's like? Sanshiro wondered each time he passed by. He had still not met the man. The central panel of the gate were locked. He entered through the gate's small door. The distance from the gate of the front door was shorter than he had imagined. Oblong slabs of granite marked the path. The door of handsome, narrow latticework was closed. Sanshiro rang the bell. The maid who appeared, he asked, Is Miss Mineko at home? He felt strangely embarrassed. He had never asked for a young woman at the door of her home before, and he found it difficult to do so. The maid was unexpectedly grave, almost reverential. She left him at the doorway for a moment, then reappeared, bowed respectfully, and led him to the drawing room, a western room with heavy curtains. It was rather dark. Please wait here. Miss Mineko will be with you shortly. The maid went out. Sanshiro took a seat in the quiet room. The wall in front of him had a small fireplace. Over it was a white mirror, and in front of that 2 candlesticks. Sanshiro stood up to look at his reflection between the candlesticks and sat down again. Just then, a violin sounded in another part of the room. It faded immediately, as though a gust of wind had carried it from somewhere, discarded the sound and blown it away. Sanshiro was disappointed. Cradled in the overstuffed chair, he listened intently, wishing for more, but there was no more. And in the space of a minute he forgot about the violin. He looked at the mirror and candlesticks. They had a strangely Western air about them that he associated with the Catholicism. Although why Catholicism he himself did not know. The violin sounded again. This time some high notes and low notes echoed out 2 or 3 times in quick succession before the sound was abruptly cut off. Sanshiro knew nothing about Western music, but he could not believe that this was part of the melody. It was someone making noises on the violin, some sounds that were perfectly suited to his emotion. The random notes had fallen like a handful of freak hailstones from the sky. Sanshiro moved half-seeing eyes to the mirror, and there stood Mineko. The maid had closed the door, he thought, but now it was open. Mineko was reflected clearly from the chest upward, holding aside the curtain that hung beyond the door. In the mirror, she looked at Sanshiro. Sanshiro looked at Mineko in the mirror. She smiled. "Welcome," she said. Her voice was behind him. Sanshiro had to turn around. The two came face to face. Mineko bowed with the slightest forward movement of her forward swirling hair. The gesture implied an intimacy that made bowing unnecessary. Sanshiro, however, raised himself from the chair and bent low in formal greeting. Ignoring his bow, she walked around Sanshiro and sat down, facing him, her back to the mirror. So you have finally come," she said. Her tone was as intimate as her little bow. These few words made Sanshiro extremely happy. She wore a kimono of shining silk. Perhaps she had kept him waiting for so long in order to change for him? But there was no hint of that in her dignified calm. She sat looking straight at him, saying nothing. A smile about her eyes and lips, and the sight of her filled Sanshiro with sweet agony. He could not endure being looked at this way, he began to feel, almost from the moment she sat down. He opened his mouth at once in a kind of spasm. "Sasaki, Yojiro came to see you, I'm sure." Mineko revealed her white teeth. Behind her, to the left and the right, the candlelight sticks were aligned in the mantelpiece. They were oddly shaped pedestals, fashioned of gold. Sanshiro had assumed they were candlesticks. In fact, he did not know what they were. Behind these inscrutable candlesticks was the clear expanse of the mirror. Obstructed by the heavy curtains, the light of the windows did not illuminate the room sufficiently. The cloudy weather added to the gloom. Sanshiro looked at Mineko's white teeth. Yojiro came to see me. And what did he say to you? That I should come to see you. I thought so. Is that why you came? She insisted on asking the question. Yes, Sanshiro hesitated. I suppose so. Mineko concealed her teeth. She rose from her seat and approached the window and peered outside. Look how cloudy it is now. It must be cold outside. No, it's surprisingly warm. There's no wind at all. Oh, she returned to her seat. Actually, about the money, Sasaki... I know. She stopped him. Sanshiro did not try to go on. But what exactly happened? One bad bet at the racetrack. Oh my, she exclaimed, but her face showed little surprise. In fact, she was smiling. What a naughty man, she added. Sanshiro did not attempt to reply. It must be hard to second guess a horse race, harder than guessing what's in someone else's mind. Some people wear indexes too, but you don't even try to guess what's in their minds. You're so easygoing. I'm not the one who bet on the horses. You're not? Who is? Sasaki. Mineko laughed aloud. Sanshiro too was amused. So you didn't need the money after all? How silly. No, I'm the one who needs it, alright? Really? Really? This is all very strange. Yes, I know. So I don't have to borrow it from you. Why not? Don't you like the idea? No, I don't mind. But I shouldn't take it from you without telling your brother. Why not? It's alright with him. Oh, then I guess it's alright. But I really don't have to borrow it. If I write home, I can have the money in a week. Please, let me force you. Mineko grew suddenly distant. It felt as if the woman had been beside him only a moment ago was standing at the far end of the street. He was sorry he had not taken the money, but now it was too late. He kept his eyes glued on the candlesticks. Sanshiro had never in his life tried to ingratiate himself with anyone. Mineko too remained in her distant retreat. After a short while, she stood up and peered outside again. It doesn't look like rain, does it? No, it doesn't, he replied in the same tone. I think I'll go out then, she said, still standing at the window. He interpreted this as a request for him to leave. No, it was not for him that she had changed into shining silk. It's time for me to go. He stood up. Mineko saw him to the door. He stepped down into the hallway and was putting on his shoes when Mineko said from above, I'll walk with you a little way. Is that all right? If you like, Sanshiro replied, tying his shoelaces. A moment later, she was stepping down the concrete floor. She leaned close to him and whispered, Are you angry? Just then, the maid hurried out to see them off. They walked half a block together in silence, Sanshiro thinking all the while about Mineko. Her parents must have raised her to have her own way, and now, as a young woman, she doubtless have more freedom at home than most others and could do anything she pleased. That much was clear if she could walk down the streets with him like this without asking anyone's permission. She could do it because she had no parents and because of her elder brother, a young man himself, put no restrictions on her. If she were to try this in the country, though, she would not have it so easy. How would Mineko react if someone told her to live like Miwata or Mitsu? Tokyo was so different from the country. It was so wide open, so perhaps most of the women were like Mineko. He could only imagine what the others were like, but at a distance, they did seem to be a little bit more old-fashioned than Mineko. It occurred to him how right Yojiro had been. She was an Ibsen woman, but was it only her disregard for convention that made her an Ibsen woman, or did it involve her deepest thoughts and feelings? He did not know. Soon, they came to the main street of Hongo. They were walking together, but neither knew where the other was going. By this time, they turned 3 corners, doing so each time without a word, as though they had arranged it all beforehand. As they neared the Yonchome intersection, Mineko asked, "Where are you going?" "Where are you going?" They glanced at each other. Sanshiro looked very grave. Mineko could not help revealing her white teeth again. "Come with me," she said. They turned the corner headed towards Kiridoshi. There was a large stone building half a block down on the right hand. Mineko stopped when they reached it. He drew a thin passbook and seal from her obi and held them to Sanshiro. "Please," she said. "Please what?" "Please take some money out for me with this." Sanshiro took the passbook from her, and in the middle of the cover it said deposit book, and under that Satomi Mineko. Sanshiro stood there at her, looking at her, book and seal in hand. 30 yen, she said, speaking as if to a man used to withdrawing money from the bank every day. Fortunately, while he was still living at home, Sanshiro had often set out for Toyotsu with a bank book. He climbed the stairs at once, opened the door and entered the bank. He presented the book and seal and received the money. But when he came out, Mineko was gone. She had walked a short way down the street from Kiridoshi. He hurried after her, catching up. He thrust his hand in his pocket to deliver the money when Mineko asked, "Have you seen the Tanseikai group's exhibition?" "Not yet. They sent me 2 complimentary tickets, but so far I haven't found the time. Would you like to go now?" "I don't mind." "Let's go then. The show will be closing soon. I owe it to Mr. Haraguchi to stop in once at least." "Did Haraguchi send you the tickets?" "Yes. Do you know him?" "I met him once at the professor's." "He's an amusing man, don't you think?" "He's planning to practice the Idiot's Delight. I heard him say that he wanted to take up the no drum and that he was going to paint your portrait. Is it true?" "Yes, I'm a high-class model." Sanshiro was by nature incapable of clever retort. He could never have topped this, and so he said nothing, even though Mineko seemed to want him to. Again, Sanshiro put his hands in his pocket. He pulled out the passbook and seal and handed them to Mineko. The money was supposed to be sandwiched in the book. But Mineko asked, "And the money?" It was gone. He searched the pocketbook again, pulled out a handful of worn-out bills. She did not reach for them. Please hold it for me." Sanshiro felt somewhat put upon, but he preferred not to argue at this point. Argue at a time like this. Besides, they were in the middle of a street. He returned the bills, produced at her suggestion to the place where he had found them. How strange she was. Many students passed them on the street. Each one glanced at them without fail as they walked by, a few approaching them. The distance stared at them all the way. The road to Ikenohara seemed awfully long to Sanshiro, but not so long that it made him want to take the streetcar. They moved ahead with slow, deliberate steps, and when they reached the museum, it was nearly 3 o'clock. The building that housed the exhibition had an unusual sign, the name Tanseikai, the Red and Green Society, and the design around the characters was something entirely new to Sanshiro, but new in the sense that one could never see them in Kumamoto, and therefore strange. The paintings inside were even more so. To Sanshiro's eyes, the only clear distinction between oil and watercolor. He did have his likes and dislikes, however. 1 or 2 of them he thought he wouldn't mind buying. As far as technical excellence were concerned, however, he understood nothing. And so he said nothing, resigned from the start to his own lack of critical sense. "How about this one?" Mineko asked. "Yes, how about it? This one is interesting, don't you think?" Yes, he supposed it was. He was utterly unresponsive. He might have been 1 or 2 things, an idiot who couldn't carry on a conversation, or a man too important to bother. If an idiot, his lack of affectation was charming. If important, his reserve was infuriating. Many of the paintings were by a brother and sister who had travelled abroad extensively. Their works bore the same surname, and their paintings hung together. Mineko stopped in front of one. "This must be Venice," she said. Sanshiro could tell that much. It was so Venetian. He wanted to take a ride on a gondola. Gondola was one of his favorite words from college. There was only one way to ride in a gondola, with a woman. The blue water, the tall houses on either side, the inverted reflections of the houses, the bits of red dottings of reflections, Sanshiro viewed all of them in silence. Then, Mineko said, "The brother seems to be a much better painter, would you say?" Sanshiro had no idea what she meant. The brother? The brother painted this one, surely? Whose brother? Mineko looked at him with mystified expression. The sisters' painting are on that side. These are the brothers. Sanshiro took a step back and turned to look at the other side of the passageway, down which they had just come. The many paintings hanging there were all showed the same kind of foreign scenes as the one on this side. Someone else did those? You thought they were all by the same person? Yes, he said, and a blank moment followed. Then they looked at each other and laughed. Mineko opened her eyes wide in mock astonishment. "Really?" she murmured, taking several steps ahead. Sanshiro stayed where he was and examined the Venetian canal. Again, in her flight, Mineko looked around and Sanshiro was not watching her. She came to a halt, staring hard at his profile. Just then, a loud voice called out, "Mineko!" Both Mineko and Sanshiro turned in the direction of the voice. Outside a door marked "Office" stood Haraguchi. Behind and partially hidden by him was Nonomiya. Mineko looked at the more distant Nonomiya rather than at the one who called her name. The instant she glanced at him, she moved back to her place beside Sanshiro. Standing so that the others could not see clearly, she leaned close to Sanshiro and whispered something to him. He had no idea what she was saying. He was going to ask her to say it again, but she withdrew to where the two men stood and was already greeting them. Nonomiya turned to Sanshiro and said, "What a strange companion!" Before Sanshiro could reply, Mineko said, "We are well matched, don't you think?" Nonomiya said nothing in reply. Instead, he turned on his heel to face a large painting, perhaps 6 feet high and 3 feet wide. It was a portrait, and almost all black. So little light fell on the subject's hat and clothing that they could not be distinguished from the background. The only face shone white in the blackness. Only the face shone white in the blackness. It was a wasted face, a flash of a cheek sunken. "This is a copy, isn't it?" Nonomiya said to Haraguchi. At that moment, Haraguchi was intent on explaining something to Mineko. The exhibition was about to close. The number of visitors had dropped considerably. He himself had been coming to the office every day at first, but rarely bothered now. Something had come up today for a change, and he brought Nonomiya along. What a fortunate coincidence that they should have met here today! As soon as this show was over, he would have to begin preparing for the next, and would then be very busy. The New Year's show ordinarily opened at cherry blossom time, but some of the other artists wanted it to be a little early, which for him was like having 2 openings, one right after the other. This would call for desperate efforts with brush and canvas. He definitely wanted to have Mineko's portrait finished by then. It was an imposition, he knew, but would she please go on posing for him straight through the end of the year? To make it up to you, I'll hang the picture here. Only now did Haraguchi turn towards the black painting. Nonomiya had been standing there blankly all the time, looking at that one picture. "How do you like it, the Velakes?" "It's a copy, of course. It's not a very good one." Haraguchi finally began to explain the painting. Nonomiya no longer had to say anything. "Who did the copy?" Mineko asked. "Mitsui. He's really better than this. I don't think much of it," Haraguchi said, stepping back a pace or two. "It was bound to fail. The original was done by a man at the height of his powers." Haraguchi cocked his head to one side. Sanshiro looked at the band at his neck. "Have you seen everything?" the painter asked Mineko. He spoke only to Mineko. "Not yet." "Why not forget it and come with us to the Seiyoken? I'll buy you a cup of tea. I have to go there and you have to see the manager about our gathering. He's a friend of mine. Now it's just the right time for tea. Soon it'll be too late for tea, too early for dinner, no good for anything. What do you say?" Come with us. Haraguchi liked to drop an occasional English expression into his speech. Mineko looked at Sanshiro. His face said that he could go either way. Nonomiya stood outside of the conversation. As long as we are here, we might as well see everything, don't you think? She asked Sanshiro. He said he did. Here's an idea then, Haraguchi went on. There's a special gallery in the back. Fukami's posthumous works are there. Just look at those and come over to Seiyoken. We'll be waiting for you. Thank you very much. Now, with Fukami's watercolors, don't look at them the way you look at ordinary watercolors. They are his and his alone, and you'll find that they have some very interesting qualities, but you must not think of them as pictures of things. Just look at Fukami's fine personal touch. Leaving these parting instructions, Haraguchi went out with Nonomiya. Mineko thanked him and watched the two men go. Neither of them looked back. Mineko turned and walked into the special gallery with Sanshiro a step behind her. Little light penetrated this far into the museum. Just as Haraguchi had said, nearly all of Fukami's paintings were watercolors. They were arranged on one wall of the long, narrow gallery. What most struck him was the subdued tone. There was little color variety, and these colors the artist had used were pale and low in contrast. They would probably not show up as well unless they were in sunlight. More interesting was the brushwork, which revealed no sign of hesitation. Each piece gave the impression of having done in single breath. The style was free and easy. That much was clear from the way the pencil lines stood out sharply beneath the watercolors. The human figures were spared and elongated. They looked to Sanshiro like grain flails. In this collection, too, there was a scene of Venice. Here's another Venice, Mineko said, approaching him. Yes, he answered, and the name jogged his memory. What were you saying before? Before? When I was looking at the other Venice. Again, Mineko revealed her white teeth, and she did not speak. If it was nothing special, I don't have to know. It was nothing special. Sanshiro continued to look at her oddly. By now, it was after 4 o'clock on this overcast autumn day. The galleries were dark. There were very few people left, and in the special gallery, Sanshiro and Mineko were alone. Two shadows in the gloom. She moved away from the painting and stood directly in front of him. It was Sohachi. You know? Nonomiya? You know. Oh, hello. We are finishing soon. I'm so sorry. I should take down the... Hey. I need to take this down. I only have half a page. A page and a half to go. Okay. You know, it's Sohachi, you know? Nonomiya? You know? Mineko's meaning flooded into him like shattering of huge wave. You were toying with Nonomiya? Why should I do such a thing? Her voice rang with absolute innocence. Sanshiro suddenly lost the courage to say more. He moved off a few steps without word. She followed, all but clinging to him. You're not the one I was toying with. Again, Sanshiro came to a halt. He was a tall young man. He looked down at Mineko. Never mind. Why was it so wrong of me? Never mind, it's all right. Mineko turned her face away. They walked from the gallery together, and as they passed through the door, their shoulders touched. In that instant, Sanshiro thought of the woman on the train. The touch of Mineko's flesh was like a throb of pain in a dream. Is it really all right? Mineko asked in a tiny voice. 2 or 3 other spectators were walking their way. Anyhow, let's get out of here, Sanshiro said. They retrieved their shoes at the door. Stepping outside, they found that it was raining. Do you want to go to the Seiyoken? Mineko did not answer. They stood in the broad field that stretched away from the museum, their clothes growing damp in the rain. Fortunately, the storm had just begun, and it was not violent. Mineko looked across the field and pointed towards the Ueno forest. Let's go and stand under the trees. The rain would probably stop if they waited a little. They crossed the field and stood in the shade of a large cedar. It was not a good tree for warding off the train, but neither of them moved. They stood there getting wet and cold. Sanshiro? He was looking at the sky with knitted brows, and he turned his face to Mineko. Was it wrong of me before? It's alright. But... She drew closer. I just wanted to do it. I don't know why. I didn't mean any disrespect to Sohachi. Mineko fixed her gaze on Sanshiro. He saw in her eyes an appeal more profound than her words had expressed. Don't you see? They were saying, I did it for you. Never mind, it's alright, he said again. The rain fell more and more heavily. Only the smallest patch was left where the raindrops did not strike. The two of them drew closer together. They stood cowering beneath the tree, shoulders touching. Please keep the money, Mineko said through the sound of rain. I'll take it on a loan, but only what I need. Please, take it all. And that is the end of today's reading session. I'm so sorry for you guys who just came in. I'm so sorry. Thank you so much, guys. Yeah, we finished chapter 8. 5 chapter 8 of NatsumeSōseki Sanshiro. Tomorrow is Friday. I think I could maybe do tomorrow morning. I'll decide later tonight if I'm going to read tomorrow morning, or I'll read on Saturday morning. It depends. But yeah, we only have chapter 9 to chapter 13 to go. So, and then we will end this book. And then next week we can start a new book, which is Kazuo Ishiguro's very famous Never Let Me Go. Yeah. How about it, guys? Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you so much. Thank you, Fizz. I haven't seen you for a while. I think you were busy. And I was also like not consistent with my stream. I apologize for that. I should be more consistent, but sometimes it's really hard to get the motivation to get out of bed to do this. But I try my best regardless. I hope that's good enough. Thank you so much. I hope you guys enjoyed the story so far. To Jinx, I'm so sorry that you came in a bit late. If you want to like listen to the previous reading, you can always go to my Twitch VOD. After this, I always save every single reading session because I put so much effort into them and hours into them, so I save every single one. You can go to my Twitch VOD, or better still, you can go to my YouTube channel, because loading from there is a lot better than loading from Twitch. Twitch is just stupid. Yeah. Don't panic. Anyway, if you guys are interested, you guys can follow me on Twitter as usual. And on Twitter, you can get the link to my YouTube channel, where you can find all the old stuff, old reading session, all the other books that I've read before on stream. You can also join the Discord. In Discord, there is a chat tab called Noodible's playlist, whereby I linked all of the previous readings in categories like NatsumeSōseki category, Kazuo Ishiguro category, other writers category, all those things. So yeah, I hope you guys will enjoy enjoy my reading session so far. Thank you so much for being here. Seriously, I really appreciate it. how are you guys? And how are you? How do you guys like it so far? The story. I this is very reminiscent of Kokoro, but Kokoro is so much better. Kokoro is like really, 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 really like it stays in your Kokoro stays in your heart, and it's like Kokoro is hard, so it's like Kokoro really, 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 really stays in your heart after you read it. It's so good. Kokoro is so good, but this is really good as well. Sanshiro is not bad, but yeah, Sanshiro really, really what stands out is like, yeah, this guy is overthinking a lot of stuff. Yeah, but then like this is why like I think this is how like anime becomes to be like, you know, fucking people are like, oh, like love confession or like uh playing games with like the people you like or you might not like, you know, that kind of thing. Like dropping hints instead of just telling them that, hey, I like you, you know. Like, yeah, I don't like all those things. I'm a very straightforward person. If I like you, I like you. Like I don't go around like, maybe I like you. Like I don't do that kind of stupid shit. It's a waste of everyone's time. Yeah, it's like, yeah, I'm rambling. Today's session is a very good amount of time. I think I might be able to read tomorrow morning. I think I could. I think I could read tomorrow morning. Can you guys make it tomorrow morning to continue the stories? Or do you want to, or do you guys prefer Saturday morning? Let me know. I can do either tomorrow morning or Saturday morning. It doesn't really matter. I'm totally fine either way. But I'll think about it, okay? Basically what you can do is just follow my Twitter so that you guys can know whether I'm doing it tomorrow morning or I'm doing it on Saturday morning. I am not entirely sure. I'll decide later tonight, okay? Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh my god. Anyway, Saturday will be better? Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah, I can do Saturday. I'm fine. Yeah. I can sleep a bit later tomorrow. Anyway, I'm gonna go and eat because it's past lunchtime and I'm hungry. So thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate all of you. Let me see, who is it? Winterberries. Starlight here. Calicia. Thank you, Jinx. I'm so sorry you came in so late and then I ended around the same time you came in. Right, thank you, Fizz, for being here. Thank you, Starlight. Thank you to Skopaki. So, Skopaki. Thank you, Hikari, for if you're still here, Hikari. Thank you for the beats. Cheer again. You are amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you, Skopaki. I haven't seen Skopaki for a while. Thank you for dropping by my stream. Thank you to King TC. It's like King TC. We always have like an opposite time streaming time, so it's like I could never see your stream, and then somehow you managed to see my stream more often than I could see your stream. So anyway, thank you so much for everything, guys. I'm gonna go eat now. I'll see you guys.
Have you ever had a dream that you can
Hey, my Holly Wing. Hey. Thank you. Don't waste that. I will do it myself. Don't waste your 650, man. Yeah. that's my goodbye song to you all. So until then, ありがとうございました。And I'll see you guys on Saturday. Saturday, okay? I'll see you guys on Saturday, okay? Until then, take care, stay safe, stay healthy, eat your food, play game, and yeah, bye. 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 Seriously, bye. Bye. Thank you so much for today's stream. I love y'all.